That'd be better than we do.
Well, and you?
What are you up to?
Well, just coming to see if I can get informed.
Good.
We're educated. All the
Maybe build community.
Come together and look for what
Any bit will help. And you know what? It doesn't matter if you don't even come together if you can still get results. I mean, really, if you could. I'm not.
Who was the original promoter of
This event? So Doris was the one who came back and said we wanted to do it. So she said she'd put it together. We said we got a space, we got time, come do it. So probably it's one of those deals that should be every year. I mean, there should. I've tried for years. You just can't get the committee. I couldn't get the secretary. I couldn't get the government. I couldn't get because it's session. So do anything in the middle of the week where you say, hey, we got Cattlemen. So they never can guarantee anything. So you can't plan a program and say, well, Beaker didn't show up. Starting point.
Good morning. If I could have you start finding some seats, please. Good morning. If those of you still in the entryway can start finding your way towards the seats, I will get started on some introductions for today's program. I'm Clay Birkland. I'll be the MC and the moderator for today's events. Welcome to the program this morning, The Need for Unity in the Cattle Business. We are on a fairly tight time schedule, so you'll have to listen to my bad jokes later on afterward. I won't start the morning with them. I would like to introduce our sponsors of today's events. Starting with the Black Hills Stock Show and Rodeo and the Central States Fair Board. I think we have Dean Johnson and Tyler Trevelyan here somewhere. Thank you, gentlemen. Ron, Amanda, I think we have Ron here. I haven't seen Amanda or Sylvia, but thank you guys for allowing us this venue. Amy Pravacek from Zoetis. Amy, if you'd stand, I saw you here somewhere earlier. You are standing. Stand taller. Sorry, I couldn't see her on the TV. For the Vitalix, we have Ed Weber, District Sales Representative for North Dakota and South Dakota. Thank you, Ed. And then Dennis and Doris Lowing, Western South Dakota independent dealers for Vitalix. Thank you, Denny and Doris. D-Tie Vet Supply. I saw Dee and Tyler walk in a little bit ago up here in the front. Thanks, guys. Branding Impressions, Cassie Hicks and Breezy Miller. Pioneer Bank and Trust. I know we have Lindsay at the door greeting folks. Dylan Clarkson, our president and CEO, sitting down here in the front. And, of course, myself, Director of Ag Banking for Pioneer Bank and Trust. We also have as sponsors the Tri-State Livestock News and the Farmer Rancher Exchange, the Home Slice Radio Group, KBHB Radio, and Your Ag Network. And this will be available on youragnetwork.com. I believe we're live streaming, if I'm correct with that. Also, if you hear something through the program that you want to hear more detail of or go back and look, it will be archived there on youragnetwork.com. To get us rolling right into the program this morning, I'd like to welcome to the podium Dr. Gary Sides with Zoetis. There's a whole lot of fine print in the program my eyes can't quite see anymore. You're welcome to read that. I think Dr. Sides will share us a little bit of information about himself as he begins. On the topic of modern ag and a cancel culture. Dr. Sides, welcome.
So good morning. Thank you folks for coming out. Mic check. Can you guys hear me all right? You good back there? Not loud? Is that better? I need to eat the mic. Oh, okay. So the need for unity in the cattle business. I don't think there's ever been a time in the history of the cattle industry that we need unity. Ever. So I have three groups represented here today that don't always see eye to eye. So my job today is trying to show us some issues that I think we can all unify on that are probably much more important in the areas that we disagree with. So that'll be my job today. So I've given a version of this talk now for about 15 years. And I used to call it Modern Ag in a Facebook culture because everybody's on social media and that was the way we would communicate. But that's all changed in the last 2 years. It's become a cancel culture. And the first casualty of a cancel culture is the truth. It is. And if your truth, and we believe in absolute truth, if your truth doesn't fit the politically correct narrative, then you're canceled. You say things on Twitter or Facebook or Google or YouTube or whatever that doesn't fit their narrative, you're canceled. So here are the three sacraments of the cancel woke culture that we're living in today. First one is simple lies are more palatable than complicated truths. I saw that from John Ellis. Dr. Ellis is probably the world's leading expert on bovine respiratory disease, BVD. He works in Saskatchewan, Canada, and he's talking about vaccines when he made that statement, but it really fits what's going on today. They repeat these simple lies long enough they actually start believing it themselves. And some of the things that are truth takes more than a 5-second soundbite to communicate. The next one is we have unquestionable answers. We have non-negotiable narratives. And you can't question the narrative. The science of climate change is settled. You can't question that at all. The science of beef and the diet is settled. You can't question that at all. We've been a victim of the cancel culture for about 50 years now. And then finally, the end justifies the means. They have no morals, no ethics. They'll say whatever they can, whatever they can do, so that everybody fits their narrative. And the end game, folks, is that they cancel your freedom of speech. Because whenever you speak up and say the truth and you get canceled or fired from your job, it makes you afraid to speak up. And that sounds much like the Soviet Union. That's the way we're going today. So I'm going to do a little history lesson. Back around 600 BC, the Babylonians captured the Israelites and they put them into captivity in Babylon. And Daniel was one of the Israelites that was captured. In the book of Daniel, the Bible, he predicts 4 world empires. Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. King Xerxes was in the Medo-Persian. It was Nebuchadnezzar in the Babylonian. You have Alexander the Great in the Greek Empire, and then finally you have the Roman Empire. They predict 4 of those empires, and they all came true. In August of 480 BC, during the Medo-Persian Empire, their king was King Xerxes, same King Xerxes that you read about in the book of Esther in the Bible. King Xerxes took a 1,000,000-man army and invaded southern Europe at a place called Thermopylae, the Gates of Fire. And he attacked the Greek forces are there. There were 300 Spartans and about 1,000 of their Greek allies that met them at the Gates of Fire, Thermopylae, a very narrow entrance into southern Europe. And the battle lasted just short of 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, all those 1,300 men were slaughtered, but that 12 days gave Greek army time enough to organize, and they're able to, you get to buy beer today if your phone goes off. So that 12 days gave the Greek army time to regroup and actually put back this 1,000,000-man army of King Xerxes. And most historians believe that that's why they're not speaking Farsi or Arabic in Western Europe today, because of that one battle and the sacrifice of those 1,300 men. So the king of the Spartans was a guy by the name of Leonidas. King of the Medo-Persians was a guy by the name of Xerxes. Toward the end of the battle, when it looked obvious that they couldn't hold out any longer, Xerxes met with Leonidas and offered him surrender and let him to go free. And Leonidas told him no. So Xerxes says, well, then when we attack you today, our arrows will block out the sun. So how did Leonidas respond to that? He said, good, then we'll get to fight in the shade. So folks, we are fighting in the shade today in the cattle business. There are more arrows aimed at our industry today than ever before in our history. So let me just walk through some of these. Folks, I'm amazed that people still eat this product. It must really taste good because they think they're going to die when they eat it. Because that's all they've heard for the past 50, 60 years. So what are some of the arrows? Well, problem is when you look at advertisements for food and what's good for you to eat, you never see beef on that in that photograph. And matter of fact, besides plants and veggies, they're now saying you should eat fake meat, plant-based meat, or lab-based meats. So every time you see an advertisement for food, beef is never on it. There's saturated fat in beef, and that causes heart disease and obesity and diabetes. Same with cholesterol. You know that when you raise cattle, you're destroying the planet because of climate change, global warming. You know that, right? That's settled science. That's the narrative. We use these technologies in the business, implants, beta agonists, ionophores that improve cattle performance, and they talk about those all the time, how it's bad for humans. When you use antibiotics to treat your livestock, you produce resistant bacteria that get into the human food chain and kill humans. That's the narrative. There's pathogenic organisms in both hamburger meat and in chicken. And then the World Health Organization equates smoking as the same as eating red meat as a principal cause of colon cancer, which is an absolute lie. Yet every time you listen to USDA, HHS, any of the dietitians, they say, well, you can't eat red meat because of colon cancer. And then you see these billboards that say, Unregulated agriculture is putting our waterways at risk. Has anybody here ever seen a Holstein County creek before? Do you know who paid for this billboard? Any idea? Well, you did. This was during the Obama years. This is the EPA put that billboard up there. What's the first two words on that billboard? Unregulated agriculture. What does the EPA want to do with us? They want to regulate us. So this, you guys know who Jerry Stuck is? He's a veterinarian with North Dakota State University up in North Dakota. So several years ago, during a blizzard, during calving season, he's out checking cattle and he finds his calf. It's about half dead, still has a pulse. He takes it into his house, puts it in his wife's bathtub. This calf survived this. They named it Shivers. It'll die on the ranch. They'll never be able to sell it. People accuse us of inhumane treatment of livestock. Yet Jerry Stuck is out there risking his life in a blizzard during calving season, which is what we do, but no one knows it. They see a picture of a fork loader with a broken-legged Holstein cow, and they think that's the way we treat our livestock. And then there's a group out of Harvard Nutrition Medical School that believe that not only is beef bad in the diet, it's also bad for the planet. And they have a very powerful commission, highly funded, to talk about don't eat red meat because of all these other issues. And what's that guy holding right there? What is that plant? This is right off their website. That's a sugar beet. So apparently, sugar is the ideal food and not beef. The other problem we have is we're really good at what we do. Americans don't know what it's like to be hungry unless you choose to do that. And we're so good at what we do that our dogs and cats eat better than most children in the third world. And so people have never realized how lucky they are and how blessed they are to live in our country where food is so abundant and so inexpensive. Anybody not have a smartphone? One redneck right there, that's all right, it's okay. So with this little piece of technology, you can actually access the accumulated knowledge of mankind. Yet these kids don't know where the food comes from. They don't know. They're 3 and 4 and 5 generations removed from the farm, and we haven't told them as an industry. They don't know. We've done a horrible job of educating the non-producers, which is 99% of the population, about how their food gets to their plate and why it's there. We taught them how to read and write. To all you hunters who kill animals for food, shame on you. You should go to the store and buy the meat that was made there where no animals were harmed. So they apparently think that they just grow food in Safeway. Our customers are really confused. They think that we should raise livestock like this Norman Rockwell painting. And that's the way we should raise livestock. And they've never been out in the United States to see what agriculture is like in the third world. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to take a trip and never leave the farm. We're going to see what agriculture is like in the third world. So here's a picture of a guy in Arkansas taking that sheep to town. That's a joke. It's okay, you guys can laugh. This guy's taking live chickens to town. This guy's taking live pigs to town. This guy's taking, come on, go. This guy's taking live women to town. So this is an Eastern European SUV. My wife would not like that mode of transportation. So I lived in Peru back in the early 1980s for a couple years. And the third world is hell on horses and women. It's really tough on women. That's one thing that modern agriculture eliminates is this type of a lifestyle for women. So these next pictures I took some 40 years ago. Women were a beast of burden then, they are today. Nothing's changed in that country. This couple lived about 8,000 feet up in the Andes. This is a sheep corral, and that's their house right there. That's their home. This couple lived about 15,000 feet on the Altiplano, top of the Andes. In this grassland they call the Altiplano. That's a grass hut. That's not a bale of hay. This is a Peruvian soccer mom. She's about 4'6". She's wearing all the clothes she owns. These ladies here in the corner are starting the textile industry in Peru. They're taking that ewe and they're shearing it by hand. Then she'll take the raw wool in her left hand and a drop spindle in her right hand and make yarn out of it. Then they'll take that wool and they'll dye it and make their own clothing out of it. Looked like a lot of fun to do at 14,000 feet elevation in the valley. So the northwest corner of Peru is one of the driest deserts on the planet. They don't even have windmill technology. Hauling water by hand. This is a John Deere tractor in Peru. This is a Peruvian school bus. This is John Ellis right there, the guy I talked about at Saskatchewan. He was on a project with CSU at the same time I was there. We were going up the mountains, and we passed this family that were moving all their livestock up the mountain, and here are their kids in the very back in their Peruvian car seats. And right in front of this is a Peruvian pet carrier. I don't know why a duck and a cat would sit on that burro, acting like they knew what they were doing. They still use llamas as beasts of burdens, take sheep to town on top of a commercial bus. This is a Peruvian wheat they raise at about 15,000 feet on the side of that mountain. The potato originated in Peru. These folks are harvesting potatoes at 14,000 feet. This is why women live longer than men. So that guy is actually welding the gas tank, and he's OSHA compliant because he, come on, get there. He blocked up that rear tire. This is when your ass is too small. And this may be the funniest picture I've ever seen. There's a physics lesson here. It takes a while to figure it out. So let's talk about how we're blessed. Less than 7% of the world's population own their own home, never hungry by choice, drink clean, pure water, own a mobile phone, access the internet, and have either gone to high school, college, or technical school. How many of you guys fit that survey right there? Every one of you. And you're 7%, or less than 7% of the planet is that fortunate. So what's the value of ag technology? Folks, if we had the same ag technology today across the board as we did in the 1950s, we can only feed half of the current U.S. population. Half. Without any of the technology we've accomplished in the last 70 years. If we applied that across the whole planet, we would need an additional 20 million square miles of farmland to feed the current world population of 7.8 billion. Folks, 20 million square miles is about the landmass of South America. Back in the 70s, they were predicting global famines because of this very thing. But what happened? You guys adopted technology. Farmers adopted technology, and there's not been global famines. In 2022 versus just 22 years ago, that's 32 years ago. In our cattle business, we have 48% more body weight gain with 1.4% fewer cattle and have lowered our carbon emissions by 4.4%. I can't compete with that horse, can I? 4.4% for every kilogram of beef we produce. That's the value of the technology in our business. Since the 1960s, we've doubled beef production and reduced our greenhouse gases by 11%. In 1776, 19 farmers could feed themselves plus one other person. 1945, one farmer could feed himself plus 19 others. Today, we're like 1 to 200. There's not many of us that feed everyone else. And that's what brings us to our current level of civilization in this country. Because only one of you can feed another 100 or so, that other 100 can do many of the things with their God-given talents and gifts and abilities and not have to worry about where their food comes from. I can have medical advances, scientific advances, electronics, transportation, all because they don't have to worry about their food because we provide it and we turn everyone else loose. And no one knows that we do it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in Roswell, New Mexico on my maternal grandparents' farm. I picked cotton as a kid. How many white people you know picked cotton as a kid? How many black people you know picked cotton as a kid? So one thing about young boys and girls, they have to be taught how to work, and I was taught how to work. That was on my maternal side. On my granddad's side, my paternal grandparents, we had a ranch in Magdalena, New Mexico. We had 60 square miles and 300 cows. We had 2 pieces of technology, barbed wire and blackleg. This is my father, Joe James. Joe died at the ripe old age of 23 in the summer of 1952. I was born 8 months later in April of 1953. So what disease took my father's life in the summer of 1952? You guys ever heard of polio? Not much, have you? Because it's been eradicated. Jonas Salk developed a vaccine in the early 1950s, too late for my father Joe. The year that Joe died, there's about 80,000 people had polio. It was a horrible disease. There was no cure. It appeared out of nowhere. So this is a guy that really influenced my life. This is my granddad. He was born in 1888, saw buffalo run wild in the prairies, saw the U.S. put a man on the moon. Pretty amazing lifetime. When you have a 60 square mile ranch, you spend a lot of your time building fence. So my first PhD was post hole digging. This is the limit of my granddad's technology. He hauled the first barbed wire into the Pecos Valley, New Mexico. This is a doctor's bill dated 1933. My granddad had an accident on a ranch. He fell and he broke his femur right where it attaches to the hip socket. They had no technology to repair that kind of break in those days. They put him in traction for 6 months in a hospital in El Paso. Bone never grew back. They finally said, sorry, Mr. James, go home and run your 60 square mile ranch. From your bedroom, you'll never walk again. 1933. This photograph was taken 20 years later. That leg's still broken. He goes home in 1934 and buys one of those exercise bicycles, crawls up on it, starts pedaling that bicycle, and he built the muscles up in his leg and hips enough it would hold that loose femur in place. He walked till he died at the age of 87, rode that bike 10 miles a day every day of his life, rode horseback into his 80s. Folks, you do not ride a horse with a broken leg for fun, do you? But when there's no technology that we absolutely take for granted, that's what you got to do. So let's start with something I think we can all agree on. This is a little bit of settled science I'm going to start with. I go see my general practitioner for my annual physical, and he takes my blood pressure, and I'm 180 over 120. What's the first thing he tells me to do? Drop the salt, right? So the current recommendations are, if you're an old guy like I am, American Heart Association says 1,500 milligrams a day, that's 1.5 grams. If you're young folks, 2,400 milligrams a day, 2.4 grams. This paper came out 10 years ago now. This is kind of the Bible of blood pressure. This is the American Journal of Hypertension. These guys reviewed 170 of the clinical trials that actually fed people high and low sodium diets and measured their effect on blood pressure. So what do you think they found when they summarized 170 clinical trials where they actually measured blood pressure, folks on low sodium diets? What they found was that folks on the low sodium diets had no change in blood pressure and had higher rates of heart disease than the folks on the high sodium diets. So folks, it appears that they've not even been right about salt. But you can't challenge this, right? You can't challenge the narrative that sodium raises blood pressure. That's what the data says, and that's not what you hear. So now the CDC says a year later, now you need to eat between 3,000 and 7,000 milligrams per day of salt. But none of you guys have heard that, have you? Because none of you guys disagree whenever I mentioned that sodium. Did you know this? Not many do, and it's a 10-year-old study. So when you look at the ideal diet that they're telling us to eat today, it's a diet of fruits and veggies. If you eat this, you'll never die. You'll never need health insurance. You'll never die. This is the ideal diet. And it all started with this guy named Ansel Keys. He was a physiologist at the University of Minnesota. He did wrote a paper called the 7-Country Survey post-World War II, where he actually looked and did a survey and asked what people ate, and then looked at the government's records to see what people died of. The K in his last name stands for K rations. This guy's the one that developed the Army's K rations. So because of this paper he published showing that saturated fat was the #1 cause of death in all these 7 countries, he pushed the government, dietitians, universities, promote a diet that's low in fat and high in carbohydrates. He convinced a senator from South Dakota by the name of George McGovern and his vegetarian staffer to institute what we now call the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which started in 1980. And every 5 years, the USDA and HHS published the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, and every 5 years since 1980, they've said eat less red meat, fat, and more fruits and veggies. They've been saying that for now 40-some years. So here is the date they initiated the government guidelines, and this is the rate of obesity that occurred since then. So is that just a random event, or is that correlated to what the government was telling us to do? Someone go ride that horse. Circle the wagons or something. The problem with Dr. Keyes, he actually surveyed 16 countries and cherry-picked the 7 that fit his bias. And we've been, pardon the French, screwed ever since because of this guy right here. He lied, and that's the narrative that's been going on now for some 60 years. It's dogma in the university system. It's dogma of dietitians. You can't challenge this because this is what government's saying. So we listen to them. We eat more grains, fruits, and veggies, less red meat, milk, and eggs. We've gone from animal fats to veggie oils, beef to chicken, from whole milk to skim milk. Ideal diet is low-fat, high-carb, avoid red meat. So what's the results after 70 years of this? Literally 70 years being told to eat a low-fat, high-carb diet. Obesity's gone from less than 15 to more than 35%. That means a third of Americans are obese. 1/3. 2/3 are overweight. And type 2 diabetes gone from less than 1% to 14%. Folks, these are epidemics in any definition of that term. They're epidemics. We saw high rates of heart disease, and these are obesity-related diseases. To me, the one most interesting one is the one on the very bottom I haven't read. Obesity is the #1 comorbidity of COVID-19. So were we not primed as a country when we got exposed to that virus? Because when you look at all the deaths and the really sick people, they almost always had a comorbidity, and obesity is #1. 2/3 are overweight, 1/3 are obese. So here's what beef looks like. There's 20 amino acids, 9 are essential. Your body can't make them, you got to get it in the diet. Beef has all of them. You can't get them from plants. They're usually low in lysine and methionine. The best sources of heme iron in nature come from beef. The iron in spinach is like less than 1% biologically available. B vitamin is only found in beef products. It's a great nutrient-dense product, but fat's become an F word, a 4-letter F word. Can't stand fat. Got to get rid of it. We feed our children low-fat diet. You know that your nervous system is 80% fat? And there are essential fatty acids you have to have in your diet, and a low-fat diet doesn't provide them. We can't drink whole milk. What percent fat's whole milk? Just 4%. But you can't drink it. So you got to drink this nasty stuff, or if you drink this, you'll never die. How do you get fat-free half and half? How does that work? And then even worse than that, they promote the almond milk and coconut milk. Have you ever read the label on almond milk? It's water, sugar, and almond extract. It's just crazy. My boss is a veterinarian in Gruver, Texas. He took this photograph of his daughter's lunch tray about 6 years ago. So you see, do you guys know that the USDA does not allow whole milk in their school diets? It's got to be non-fat milk. So that's non-fat milk right here. That's non-fat salad dressing. You have this veggies and fruit. It's non-fat cheese in this pastry. Who's the nutritionist that designed the school lunch program? It's still in place. What was her name? All your kids ate this stuff. So what if it's all been a big fat lie? So what does the science actually say about the fat in beef? So I have 3 books up here. Gary Taubes wrote the top 2, Good Calories, Bad Calories, and Why We Get Fat. Nina Techotes wrote the bottom one, The Big Fat Surprise. Has anybody read any of those books? Yes, ma'am. Which one? Was it a good book? It's a great book, isn't it? So Gary Taubes actually helped edit Nina's book, The Big Fat Surprise. Probably the best book on human nutrition ever written is Good Calories, Bad Calories. What is there, 60 people here? And one of you have read this book. Read one of these. One. My blood pressure is going to 180 over 120 right now. I mean, you guys are here because you're leaders in the business. This is the best defense and offense our industry's had in 60 years, and you guys don't even know it's in print. Gary Taubes has spoken in NCBA meetings. I've taken him to dinner. I've had him in some of my nutritionist meetings. They're books that talk about the bias in the science and why our industry has been hammered by the bias and bad science for 60 years. It talks about the value of saturated fat in the diet, the value of saturated fat in the human diet. So I go see my cardiologist tomorrow, and he's going to take a blood test, and he's going to sample it for triglycerides, very low density lipoproteins, and high density lipoproteins. So if these two molecules are elevated and this one is low, what does that tell my cardiologist? Good news or bad news? Bad news, right? On the other hand, though, if HDL is elevated and those two are low, that's really good. That means I have a pretty good cardiovascular system. These are just protein carriers of cholesterol. This is what they call the bad cholesterol. That's what they call the good cholesterol. But cholesterol itself, by itself, is not a good measurement of heart disease. Never has been. It's been an easy lipid to measure, but not a very good molecule to predict it. So here's what the fat in beef actually looks like. 30% stearic, 40% oleic. These fatty acids do amazing things. They decrease the bad stuff, the LDLs and the triglycerides, and at the same time they raise HDL. The remaining 30% of the fat in beef is neutral, therefore the fat in beef is actually, it's heart healthy. Have you ever heard anyone say that in the last 60 years? That's what the science has said for 30. But it doesn't fit the narrative. Simple eyes are more palatable than complicated truths. This paper came out in the 1990s. It was a National Institutes of Health Women's Health Initiative. They invested $1 billion in your tax dollars in the 1990s, wanting to answer this question: low-fat diets prevent coronary heart disease or cancer in women. 50,000 women enrolled, 20,000 were chosen at random, eat a diet of fruits, veggies, and fiber, the ideal diet. You'll never die if you eat this diet, and you'll be as thin as a rail. They were regularly counseled to motivate them to eat this diet. And it worked. They ate 360 fewer calories every day for 8 years. 8 years. This is an 8-year study. So here are the results. After 8 years of this great diet, they lost a total of 2 pounds, a quarter pound a year. And even worse than that, their waist circumference increased, which indicated they lost muscle weight, not fat. And here's the great part. If you just do the physics on calories in, calories out, if they ate 360 less calories a day, they should have lost 36 pounds a year. So what's 36 times 8? These ladies should have disappeared from the universe. And they didn't. So folks, maybe the theory's wrong. They still teach it after increases in obesity, diabetes. This study, they still teach low-fat, high-carb. These are the guys at Harvard that part of that Lancet commission that's ongoing today. 12 years ago, they did a meta-analysis, a pooled study of the 40-some clinical trials that looked at the effect of saturated fat on heart disease. And they asked this question because they thought they knew the answer. And what they found was no, it has no effect. Saturated fat has no effect on saturated fat, on heart disease, etc. But they did find an ingredient in the diet that does affect heart disease, and that's refined carbs. And this is where I get in trouble. So what are refined carbs, folks? Sugar. That's the stuff we're really addicted to. It's that liquid bread we drink during the Black Hill Stock Show, right? So this paper came out now 3 years ago. And the reason I put this up here is because these guys challenged the narrative, the politically correct narrative, and put their jobs at risk. Literally put it at risk. Does red meat and processed meat consumption cause mortality and cardiometabolic effects? Here are the results. They looked at 61 of the observational, not clinical studies, but the epidemiological studies that looked at beef, saturated fat, heart disease, etc. Had no effect. Just the opposite of what we've been told for 60 years. Just the opposite. So these guys challenged the narrative, published the paper. Good for them. Leonard's book of biochemistry. This is a Bible of biochemistry. What controls fat deposition? Here's the actual science part of it. Insulin's a major hormone that controls how your body's handle the food it eats. When your insulin levels are elevated, it tells your body to take the food you eat and store it as fat. When insulin levels drop, there's about 9 other hormones that'll take your fat reserves and burn it, and your fat tissues will shrink. Why do you secrete insulin? That's what happens when you eat refined carbs. Insulin spikes, and what your body eats, it stores it as fat. Fat and protein don't have that effect on insulin, just carbohydrates. Carbs drive insulin, drive fat deposition. It's not physics. It's not calories in, calories out. It is hormonally regulated. Just the opposite of what they tell us. So which is true? Well, the science elites have weighed in on this one, and this is what's true, and that's what we fight against. The average American eats 130 pounds per capita sugar. So the moral of this story is, don't count calories. Look at the source of calories and what it does to insulin. If it raises insulin, it's telling your body to go store that food as fat. It doesn't matter how many hours you spend in the gym when your insulin levels are elevated. Look at foods that raise insulin, don't count calories. Gary Taubes wrote this article in the New York Times, how the sugar industry shifted blame to fat back when all this stuff was going on with Ansel Keys. It's all beef's fault, it's all fat's fault, it's not sugar at all. So here is a sugar consumption in the United States, and here's obesity levels. Almost a direct correlation. These are the culprits. Whether you eat this stuff or stop it, that's your choice. But it's not beef that's doing this to the American diet and American health. The average American drinks 400 cans of soda pop a year. 400 cans per person. The number one most recognized word on the planet is the word okay. The second most recognized is the word Coca-Cola. And it's these refined carbs that do the opposite of beef. They raise the triglycerides, they raise VLDLs, and they increase HDL, which causes a cascade of all these other events right there. Read the label on the book, this little jar of yogurt. First ingredient is non-fat milk, right? Because you can't eat fat. What's the second ingredient? Sugar, high fructose corn syrup. We have obese babies. Is there any reason? Look at the label of infant milk formula. Lininger's book, What Makes Tissue Fat? I've not been blowing smoke at you, what the data says. In the very same book, it asks this question. What makes people fat? So if I'm a biochemist, a nutritionist, veterinarian, there's no difference between tissue and people. So did they answer that question the same way? No, they did not. The dogma's there. You're overweight because you're lazy and you eat too much. If it was that easy, folks, there'd be no obese people on the planet. But it doesn't work because it's hormonally regulated. Don't fear fat. Sugar and refined carbs are the enemy. Exercise for health, not weight loss. Sleep 7 hours a night. Don't count calories. If you really want to lose weight, you fast once a week. Eat dinner at 6 o'clock at night. Don't eat anything till noon the next day. It's 18 hours of fasting. Hammers your insulin, allows your body to suck your fat reserves. This is a really cool study. This is a Texas A&M study. If I had 770 pounds of corn and I wanted to meet the protein requirements of children, what would be the best means of doing that? Feed the corn straight to children or feed it to our cattle and then feed that beef to the kids? You guys know the answer. If I fed it to children straight, I could feed protein requirements of 3 kids. If I ran it through cattle first, 17. That's the beauty of the ruminant animal. It can take things like corn and cellulose and byproducts and make food out of it. Make food out of things that humans and monogastrics can't touch, can't eat. That's why we're in the business we're in. So when you see these UN trucks feeding these starving children in the third world, what's coming out of the back of those trucks? White rice, white sugar, white wheat. Now what they need what we produce. These children need fat in their diet, not just protein. So I'm going to change subjects. What's the very first thing that comes to your mind when you see this picture? Very first. Speak up. Climate change. So I used to think that the diet issue was the number one reason that people don't buy beef. I used to think that. No mas. This is it right here. It's climate change. This is our number one issue. This is where we can unite. Never has it been more important that we unite in our business. And this is the one that's facing us today more than ever. So I'm going to do a little quiz for you guys. What percent of the atmosphere is CO2? Have you ever heard it on the press, news reports? So you guys have a smartphone. I'm going to go through the rest of these and see if you have an answer by the time we get to the end. What decade was the worst hurricanes in the United States? Every hurricane is based on global warming. Hottest decade of the 1900s. Buffalo population in the 1800s. Are they more or less efficient than cattle? Optimum CO2 for plant growth. What percent of CO2 was in the atmosphere prior to the Industrial Revolution when we started using all these fossil fuels that's destroying the planet along with cattle? You know they're calling cattle just like coal these days because of our effect on the environment? Do we have more or less extreme weather events today than 100 years ago? Are global temperatures higher or lower the same as they were in 1998? What was the little ice age? Is global warming melting the ice caps and raising the ocean levels? During Barack Obama's inaugural address in 2012, he said that if he was elected, he would stop the rising of the sea levels. Pretty arrogant. You guys look up the CO2 thing? Anyone look it up? You didn't look it up. You looked it up? Okay, we'll keep going then. So this is a Photoshop picture. You guys know that the polar bear numbers are at an all-time record high since they've been keeping records? Have you guys seen all the Canadian geese that fly through this part of the world this time of year? Where do you think they spend their summers? Are we destroying the ice pack? No, we're not. The greatest threat to the earth and human life is global warming. That's what our government says. That's what academics say. It's what the UN says. That's why we have electric cars, wind turbines, solar panels. It's all based upon we've got to get rid of those fossil fuels. I want you guys to think just a minute. What would life be like if you didn't have any gasoline for your trucks and diesel for your tractors? Just think about that for a second. That's what they're asking us to. They want us to go net zero carbon dioxide. So there's a Smithsonian magazine. It's based off the East Coast, kind of a pretty highbrow magazine. They had an article this last June entitled "Grilling the Perfect Steak." And I go, wow, what a cool article to have in this kind of highbrow magazine. This is the first paragraph. Second sentence. So many of us are trying to eat less meat for environmental reasons. Da-da-da-da-da-da. So you peasants out there, since I'm only going to let you eat a ribeye once a year, you better get it right. That's what they're telling us. All started 2006. The UN wrote a paper called the Livestock's Long Shadow. And in that paper, they stated that livestock production globally accounts for 18% of all greenhouse gases, 18%. Our USDA, HHS, all those people still say U.S. cattle account for 18% of all greenhouse gases. That's actually off by a factor of 6. It's actually less than 3%. Frank Mitloner at UC Davis actually re-evaluated that data. It's very bad data. Yet our own USDA still uses 18%. Still uses it. So what if we committed suicide, we drank the Kool-Aid, and we took our CO2 levels to zero? What if? Based on the UN's own data, if we did that, by the year 2050, we would lower global temperatures by 0.05 degrees centigrade. If we continue the insanity through the end of the century, we would lower by 0.137 degrees centigrade with no effect on the planet, zero. The other thing that really occurs to us as we think about this issue, which extreme of temperature causes the most human deaths? Extreme of cold or extreme of heat? It's always extreme of cold. If you live in Fargo, North Dakota, do you go to Alberta for a winter vacation? You go to Cancun, Mexico. Where do you go? It's nuts, just insanity. So it all comes from these computer models that as CO2 levels have been rising, and yes, they've been rising, they're measurably rising. Their computer models predict that as CO2 levels go up, so will global temperatures. That's the red line. The problem with those predictions, the actual observations from satellite sensors show no change in temperatures since 1998. Current levels are 0.04% of the atmosphere. Did anybody know that? Were you aware of that? If you would have heard that CO2 levels are 0.04% of the atmosphere and it's destroying the planet, what would your BS meter have done? Why didn't you hear that in the same sentence? Because it doesn't fit their narrative. It's 400 parts per million. That's the same as 0.04%. I was speaking to the public school teachers in Laramie several years ago when I came to this. The ecology teacher stands up and slams his fist on the desk and says, no, it's not. It's 400 parts per million. Yes, sir, it is. It's 400 parts per million. Historical past, over 3,000. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, our levels were at plant starvation levels. CO2 is a plant fertilizer. As CO2 levels rise, our crops, our grasses will grow better than what they do at 280 parts per million. The little ice age occurred about 500 years ago. Very cold period of time. People starved because the crops wouldn't grow. Temperatures have been gradually rising since then. If I own a greenhouse, I pipe in CO2 to around 1,500 parts per million because that's where plants grow the best. How many buffalo in the prairies in the U.S. in the 1800s? About 80 million. How many cattle today? About 100 million. What was the decade of the worst hurricanes in the United States? 1880s. You know, there was a hurricane in Galveston, Texas in 1900 that killed 12,000 people. 12,000 people. The oceans have been rising since the 1800s, 2.84 millimeters a year. Barack Obama didn't stop that. Do we have more forest fires than we did 100 years ago? More droughts? Folks, I grew up in New Mexico. If we got rain in September, it was a good year. I mean, drought's normal. It happens to all of us. What about tornadoes? So I gave this talk to a bunch of people from Walmart about a month ago, and 5 days later was when those tornadoes in Kentucky hit. So I just got through telling them that these events are no worse now than they were 100 years ago, and then we have 100 people get killed by tornadoes. In Kentucky, there was a tornado that was on the ground for like 200 miles. Nasty. So guys, I work for Zoetis. I'm a cattle nutritionist. I have other things to do. I spent 10 minutes looking up tornado deaths across our country in the last 200 years. This is what I found. Well, that's a picture of the actual event. Ugly, nasty. Between 1840 and 1936, there were 4 tornado events that killed between 200 and 600 people. And yet they blamed the tornadoes on global warming, right? They could have looked this up just like I did. And they did not, because it doesn't fit their narrative. What about the polar ice caps? Al Gore said there would be no ice in the Arctic by the year 2006. It's currently now at 1975 levels, which is when everybody was predicting global cooling. So I was in my 20s in the 1970s. And I'm kind of jaded about this because the very guys that told us we're going to die from global cooling in the 70s are the same ones telling us we're going to die from global warming in the years 2000s. The Antarctic ice pack is at an all-time record high. None of which would have occurred if their CO2 predictions were right. So can you guys answer this now? Can you beat the narrative? Are you going to cancel yourself and not speak up? That's what they want us to do. Number one most abundant organic compound on the planet is cellulose. Only about 1/3 of the planet's suitable for farming. The other 2/3 marginal. Only grows cellulose, and our ruminant animals can capture that cellulose and make food out of it. When chickens, pigs, and humans would die. That's why God gave us ruminants. We consume less than 5% of the world's corn supply, but when I combine our grass-fed cattle with Feedlot, it's the most efficient system on the planet. We provide 18% of the beef with just 6% of the cattle. When you guys manage your ranches, you provide water not only for cattle but for wildlife. You're a major reason we have all the herds of elk and deer we have today. Compared to the 1950s, full technology cattle production, 2/3 less land, water, feed required. We've doubled beef production in the last 60 years. The dairy guys have quadrupled their performance. Folks, this is life without fossil fuels. That's what they want us to go back to. What were the opportunities for this guy's children? Did this guy belong to a golf league? I have an N up there in the upper left. That's not Knowledge or Nebraska. But have you guys priced nitrogen lately? Any guys raised corn? What's the price of nitrogen today? Will they even tell you? Do you even know? So if you have a 200 bushel corn crop and I can't put nitrogen on it, what's your yield going to be next year? 160, 150? Probably half. So where does our nitrogen come from? Fossil fuels. Folks, even the radical wildlife folks recognize you got to use technology in agriculture. If there are going to be gazelles left in Africa, we're going to have to farm and ranch the land we're doing now and save the wild areas for the livestock. Hormones. Been around for almost 70 years. No health problems with this technology. So there's different sources of estrogen in the environment. I have estrogens in humans and estrogens in plants. Estrogen in mammals, estrogen in plants. The plant-based estrogens are called phytoestrogens. They're only like 1/1000th the activity of mammalia and estradiol. A nanogram is a billionth of a gram. There's 454 grams in a pound. So in this health food, this soy flour, there's 775 million nanograms per 500 grams, which is a little bit over a pound. I got to divide by 1,000 though, because it's only 1/1000th the efficacy. So in this health food, I have 775,000 nanograms per pound. This is my baseline. Infant milk formula, 125,000 nanograms if it's soy-based. White bread has 300 nanograms. Peanuts have 100. In a glass of whole milk, there's about 80 nanograms. A non-implanted intact bull produces 110 nanograms per pound. If I castrate that bull calf, give it an estrogen implant, I lower its estrogen by 10x. And it's statistically not different than a non-implanted steer or heifer. Prepubertal children produce 40,000 nanograms a day. Adult males, 100,000 nanograms a day. Pregnant women produce 90 million nanograms a day. One birth control contains the same amount of estrogen as if you consume 6 head of cattle a day, daily. So is there a problem with that blue line right there from an environmental, from a human health standpoint? No, there's not. So why do the Europeans ban our hormones? Because they don't have any babies. It takes 2.1 babies per female to maintain a population. Western Europe and Russia are right around 1 baby per couple. So if I'm a child in Western Europe or Russia, I have 1 set of parents, 2 sets of grandparents. I have no brothers, no sisters, no aunts, no uncles, no cousins. They're boarding up homes in those countries because there's no one to live in them. And there's no one to sell their food to. So they ban our food produced with these technologies, protect their agricultural interest. Cattlemen utilizing technology reduce the land required to produce a pound of beef by 67%, reduce greenhouse gases by 40%. We were green before green was cool. We developed these technologies for performance reasons. When you actually measure our effect on the environment, we have a lot smaller carbon footprint when we use technology. So how are we going to defend our industry against the folks that say net zero? Well, technology is one way, but the other is CO2 is not a problem. The narrative is it's going to destroy the planet, but there's no data that shows that. But you can't challenge the narrative. Antibiotics. Is that a healthy calf? Yes. Is that a healthy calf? No. So what's the humane thing to do with that calf? You hope it gets better? Or do you treat it with one of these premium macrolides like Draxxin or Zuprevo? Or do you give it a shot of penicillin and leave it alone for a week? So if I don't treat it, this is what it ends up as. What's the daily gain of that Charolais cross right there? What was its carcass quality? What was its carcass weight? Folks, when I treat this animal correctly and it recovers from that bovine respiratory disease, what happens next? They grow. Folks, everything we do is for growth in our business. Everything we do is for growth. Whether it's a vaccine, whether it's an implant, whether it's an antibiotic, because the response of the animal is always growth. What's the weaning weight of a calf that dies from BRSV in the summertime? If I didn't give it a BRSV vaccine, it doesn't matter, does it? So we should use our antibiotics judiciously. And it helps that they're a little bit expensive so that we don't use them injudiciously. But here's what the CDC says. They say half of all human antibiotic prescriptions are not warranted. Maybe we feed it too long, use it too long. But this last one just cracks me up. They say maybe we should start weighing our children before we dose them with an antibiotic. What a concept. Who knew? How long have we been doing that? And they're just now coming around to it. So which form of milk or beef will take the longest to kill you? Organic, natural, or conventional? So when you look at these labels, what do they imply about conventionally raised milk? What's it imply? What does this ad imply about conventionally raised cattle? So did you guys know that there are ruminant chickens that can actually digest grass? And so here's a grass-fed caged chicken, but it's 50% off, so people must not like it. Here I have organic gummy bears. I have almost organic sweet corn. I actually have organic cigarettes here. That's a good one. You won't get colon cancer with organic cigarettes. Organic dry cleaning. We have almost organic Christmas trees, but this is the best one. Regular lemonade is 25 cents. Organic lemonade is $3, and grass-fed organic is $6. That's marketing, folks. That kid's got it right. Stanford University, 10 years ago, organic food's better than conventionals. They looked at 7 databases, 6,000 articles. Everything that could go bad in food they looked at. Is there a difference between conventional and organic? No, there's not. Took this picture in an airline magazine a few years ago. It's great advertisement. But the question is, how many people could agriculture of 10,000 BC support in the year 2022? Maybe this row right here. You're the lucky ones. So we owe the future? Just a bald-faced lie. I'm a single mother of 2 or 3 kids. I have multiple jobs I'm taking care of to try to keep my financial boat above water. And I'm listening to all the people, the elites, the rich people tell me I need to eat, buy all my food from Whole Foods because it's better for you than anything else. What do I pull out of my already stretched budget to buy organic foods that are no better than the conventionals and a whole lot more expensive? This is a CDC chart, average life expectancy. When my granddad was 12 years old, average life expectancy in the United States was 47 years. I have feast, famine. I have the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. Feast, famine. Penicillin was produced in 1940, given to the rest of the world. A pretty steady increase in life expectancy until about 4 years ago, when it dropped because of suicides and opioid deaths. And now we have COVID, but that's an amazing line today. Here's the best reason I found to eat beef. It's in Genesis chapter 18. Abraham was outside of his tent, minding his own business, and 3 guys show up in his tent. Who were they? God and 2 angels. So when important people come to your house, what do you like to do for them? You want to feed them. So what did Abraham feed God and the angels? We fed him a choice calf and curds and milk. If it's good enough for God, it should be good enough for the rest of us. Folks, the whole Old Testament, New Testament talk about animals dying and bloodshed and to forgive us of our sins and the covering of our sins because of some animal died. And every week the Jewish people would do these sacrifices for their sins. Go to the New Testament and Christ did it once and for all. And every time we eat meat, it reminds us that something had to die to give us life. So I'm going to close with some testosterone. These are my 4 sons, Travis, Trevor, Troy, Trent. I'm the 5th generation of all males on my dad's side of the family. I had no girl cousins growing up. I know nothing about, my wife would say, old girls or young girls. But my first grandchild was a red-haired, blue-eyed girl, and they're different. I never knew that. And there's something about girl grandkids. This is Mackenzie Jean at about 6 months of age. Mackenzie at 2. Her brother Logan was born at the age of when she was 3. This is Logan's first shot at GMO corn. This is their sister Addison. Has Mia wrapped around her little finger. I have 8 grandkids. I had a brand new one born about 2 weeks ago. Any grandparents in the room? Is there anything better than a grandchild? It's the most amazing human relationship on the planet. You can't explain it to folks that don't have them. There's nothing like it. So I work for a pharmaceutical. Do you think I'd ever recommend anything getting the food supply that might hurt these kids? Not on your life. So whenever you go out and defend our business and in unity against these arrows that are aimed at us, not only do you need to know the facts, you need to have some type of an emotional hook so people know, yeah, he's really serious about this. I'm serious about this. The only thing that separates these kids from these kids are what you guys do for a living and folks like you in our defense of this thing we call our Constitution, which is as much risk today as our cattle industry is at risk. Who's going to defend it? You're deputized, folks. That's your job. So let me close with this story. In the book of Esther, have you ever read the book of Esther? It's a phenomenal story. It's a great read. King Xerxes is married to a lady called Queen Esther, whom the book is named after. So about halfway through the book, there's a guy inside of Xerxes' palace that hated Jews, and he was going to come up with a plan to annihilate all the Jews. Well, unbeknownst to Xerxes, Esther was also a Jew. And when Esther found out about this plot, she didn't know what to do. If she approached the king without his permission, she could be put to death. So she was talking to her uncle Mordecai, asking him, what should I do with this issue? Our whole countries, our whole people are going to be slaughtered. Mordecai says, Queen Esther, maybe you were born for such a time as this. So folks, maybe you were born for such a time as this. I'm going to leave you with this. Thank you guys for the invitation. I pray that unity will win the day, because never before have we needed unified people in the cattle business. Our little disagreements among our groups are minor compared to what's facing us. And that's my prayer. Thank you, folks. Have a great day.
Thank you, Dr. Sides. Some thought-provoking information there. A little housekeeping here. You'll find restrooms over here to your right. We do have coffee and cookies. We have 200 cookies, Johnny Kirstein's. If you can do the math, there's about 150 of you here. We can't have you all take 2. You got to share a little bit. We will be back in 15 minutes. Thank you all. I'll be asking you to find your seats in another 5 minutes, please. 5 minutes.
Talk to your husband.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. He won first. He walked in, and then I won when I.
I can ask you to find your seats, we have a couple minutes until we begin again. All right, if I could ask the rest of you to return to your seats, please. We'll get started with the next portion of our program. Next, we're going to have a panel discussion from our representatives in Washington, D.C. From your right to, or left to right to left from me, we have Mark Haugen with Senator Thune's office, Jim Selchert with Senator Round's office, and Katie Murray with Dusty Johnson's office. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass them the microphone, and they have 2 minutes each to introduce themselves.
Good morning, and thanks for coming to this, and thanks for inviting us to it. My name is Mark Haugen. I'm the West River Director for Senator Thune. I grew up on the east side of the state, on a farm outside of Canton, and then came out here about going on 18 years now, so not sure how long a guy has to be out here to be considered West River, but I should be getting close anyway. I came here out of the newspaper business, and was editor of the Tri-State Neighbor. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. And then moved out here, been with Senator Thune since. People on the east side of the state assume I work for the Rapid City Journal or something, and the people out here assume I've always been in agriculture or in politics all my life. But got two different careers going on two different sides of the state. But it's been great to be out here to work for Senator Thune. I primarily work with the ag and natural resources side of things. So I get to spend a lot of time with our friends at the Forest Service and Park Service and such like that. Also, work day in, day out with ranchers. And it's always something new every day. But one of the things that isn't new is the challenges that go with the ranching. And, we hear about those a lot. We take the messages we hear from you and we relay them to the senator. He was out here Friday for the stock show, hears from you directly. But when he's in D.C. like he is this week, that's when we get the calls and just asking about a specific problem or what's going on, what's top of the mind. So, as we hear from you guys, that does get passed on. It doesn't go into a cave or just a silent place. He never hears the other side of it. So when you talk to us, it does get moved along, and we always appreciate your input. And look forward to hearing that today. Thanks.
I'm Jim Selchert, and I work out here in the Rapid City office, live out by New Underwood with my wife and a passel of grain. That a little better? I've never been told I was being too quiet, but. So anyway, grew up in South Dakota. I've milked cows, sheared sheep, done the pig thing. I don't really like pigs. I do like bacon though. So I have family on both sides, brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, son-in-laws, a son that are in the ag industry, that are ranchers, that are farmers, former dairymen, all that kind of stuff. So it's passionate for me. Obviously, I have grandkids that are being raised on a ranch or 2 different ranches, and so this is something that means something to me, and that's why Senator Rounds, why Mike hired me, is my relationship with all of you folks, and I know a lot of you folks out there, but the biggest thing that we do is take your concerns and get them to our bosses, the people you sent to DC to work for you, and Mike is adamant about that. This is where he wants me, is out in the country with you and figuring out what we need to do to protect our way of life. So.
Thank you, and good morning. My name is Katie Murray, and I am Congressman Dusty Johnson's West River Director here in Rapid City. I was with Dusty since the 2018 campaign. Prior to that, I was actually with Senator Mike Round's office. So I was before Jim's time, but I enjoy working with him as a colleague right now. But, Dusty's we're the newest ones on this, but, Dusty's not new to ag. He's not new to South Dakota. He's on the Transportation and the Agriculture Committee out in the House. So that's what primarily keeps him busy out in D.C. But in the state, we focus on a lot of the casework and the outreach and just making sure that we stay in touch with the community. Just like Senator Thune, Dusty was out here this last weekend too, and so he was wandering around a lot Friday and Saturday, and so if you didn't get a chance to see him and have a comment for him, we do have a booth upstairs, so feel free to stop by and chat with us. We'd love to talk with you and get more information from you and make sure we're doing the right things out in DC when Dusty's out there. So looking forward to the conversation today.
See if I can get your rope there, Mark. Okay, so just to be clear, these questions were prepared by a panel of individuals, and they have been provided ahead of time. There will be no questions taken from the floor today. If you have questions on issues deeper than what we discussed, they will be available for discussion later on this morning or later this afternoon after we complete the forum. So we will begin with question 1. The American dream of financial mobility and generational wealth transfer could be at risk under President Biden's tax plan. Both the individual income tax rate and the ability to transfer wealth between generations on family farms and ranches could be affected. The capital gains or profits from the sales of either property or an investment held over a period of time. Current capital gains are, had myself on a timer. Current capital gains are taxed at a rate as low as 15%. President Biden's plan would raise the long-term capital gains as high as 39.6%. What are our senators and representatives doing to prevent this from affecting our family farms and ranches? And then part 2 of this question will be, please update us on efforts to increase federal income and corporate tax rates of Americans in response to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 and the Preserving Family Farms Act of 2021. Ladies first.
Thank you. So, I think we would all agree that we would oppose all of these new taxes. Dusty's favorite outcome would always be to, take these tax hikes and, put them in the ground with as many nails as possible. But unfortunately, elections have consequences, and right now we are in the minority in the House and the Senate and the administration. So the best we can do right now is these blocking and tacklings. We do have a way to speak about it and a way to talk about it to make sure that that our voices, the minority voices, are heard. But we do have members like Chairman Scott from Georgia who came out against these stepped up basis, and there's a couple senators who have also come out against it and trying to put this to bed. And so reconciliation, it's a tough process for the minority. We don't usually get what we want, but as they go back to the drawing board, They'll come up again. There's always going to be new proposed taxes throughout this rest of this year, and all we can do is, keep fighting them back and telling the story of how it affects real-life Americans on the ground, and take those stories to Washington, D.C. Sometimes we hear from one side only. You only hear from the urban folks, and so when we can tell a story and really put a face and a name to these things, it makes a difference, because even people on the other side, they don't want to hurt people, and so you just have to keep having those conversations, and maybe they don't know. It's not always the person from Brooklyn's fault who doesn't know how ag works in South Dakota, but it is our job as the member of Congress from South Dakota to make sure we're telling that story, and that's what we'll continue to do.
So Katie said it right. I'm not aware of one Republican in the House or one Republican in the Senate that supports this initiative. And it's an attack on small family-owned businesses. And in South Dakota, 98% of our farms and ranches are family-owned. And out of those, I think there's about 2,500 that have been in the family for over 100 years. So, this is personal. And so I know, speaking for Senator Rounds, this is absolutely not something he would support. And I don't know of any colleagues of his that do, so.
Yes, you're right. The administration in their budget, they proposed increasing the capital gains taxes and estate taxes, and many of those components were also in the Build Back Better Act, which I'm sure many of you heard them fighting over for the past few months. Senator Thune was the point man, the face of the opposition to that effort, and fortunately at the end, Republicans remained united and pulled over a couple Democrats to defeat it. I would caution, though, that just because it's dead today, it could kind of be a little bit like a vampire, and it's going to rise again, maybe in different form, and maybe not as broad, a little more specific on what they're going to try and do. But that's something he'll stay vigilant in watching and opposing. In the effort to fight the Build Back Better, Senator Thune sponsored an amendment that would have protected the existing full benefit of the step-up basis. I'm not a tax expert, but I'm enough of one to know that was, we could not do away with that. The reason it was in there was for the administration to raise money to pay for their reckless spending, and with that reckless spending, they put in some reckless tax things, and this was one of them. It would have provided about $100 billion for them to go spend their money on what they had earmarked there. And $100 billion, you don't get that by taxing billionaires. That's coming out of your pocket, my pocket. Your average Joes are going to be the ones paying the brunt of that. So his amendment to protect that passed, and then the Democrats proposed a side-by-side amendment that was tried to undo Senator Thune's, and that failed as well. We pulled over enough to protect it. So when all was said and done, the stepped-up effort there was pulled out of the Build Back Better Act even before it went to a floor vote. So that was a good deal there. Senator Thune also led all the Republicans in a letter to the administration opposing this, wrote op-eds for Fox News even, was just really out there to oppose this. When you can get 50 Republicans on the same letter, it's quite a feat. We're kind of a big tent and don't always agree, but they were in unanimity on this in opposition to Build Back Better. Senator Thune also, a burr under his saddle for years has been the death tax, and he's been trying to get that repealed. He's currently sponsoring death tax repeal again. Have 35 co-sponsors on that, and we look forward to an uphill battle there, but one that we're going to take every time we get. So, thank you.
Concentration. in the ag industry cannot ignore the fundamental principles of supply and demand. The counterpoint to this is that in 1977, the largest meat packers controlled 25% of the beef supply. Today, just 4 corporations control 85% of the beef supply. Cattle producers are receiving less and consumers are paying more. Meanwhile, we are importing more and more cattle and boxed beef, which undercuts prices paid to U.S. cattle producers. In 2020, during the pandemic, the U.S. imported a record 4.4 billion pounds of beef and only exported 2.9 billion pounds. Right now, the price paid for fed cattle ready for processing, is the same as it was in January of 2020. Meanwhile, consumers have seen their grocery bills rise and meat prices skyrocket. Long story short, cattle farmers are struggling while meat packers enjoy record profits. The bipartisan 5014 bill, sponsored by Senator Charles Grassley and Senator John Tester, would require meat packers to purchase 50% of their supply from the market and own their supply for 14 days or less before slaughter. Please give in detail what each of our senators or representative is supporting and their future plans. And Jim, I did receive a text message suggesting you should get something from the bar over here so you talked a little more loudly. But we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a bad idea. As a former school teacher, I have no problem talking. So the biggest thing that I want to point out is that Senator Rounds has 4 of us here in the state that are our primary on the ag team. Rob in Fort Pierre area, me out here in the west, Ty Lataw down in the south central, just over the river there by Wood and Dallas and Winter in that area, and then Rebecca on the east side of the state, all of which grew up on farms and ranches, and so that's where he gets his information from. The other piece of that is we've been focusing on labeling. Labeling is important to Senator Rounds, and it has to do with the consumer knowing what they're getting. We saw the presentation here the first hour that talks about some of the things. I'll be honest, I learned some things in there. I assumed that I was eating steak and I was just willing to die early because I like it. But it turns out it's actually maybe going to extend my life, so I'm happy now. So country of origin labeling, the truth in labeling, those are the things. Obviously, he signed on to the 5014, which it's not a surprise to anybody that there's a split in the Senate Ag Committee, and so there's a compromise that's being worked on. I can't give you any details on that. We're not actually signed on to that. So the big thing is we know right now the cattle industry, the supply and demand is not following what it normally should do. Because if that were true, the way people are buying beef and the way that boxed beef is priced, then those fat cattle coming out of feed yards should bring a lot more, which drives everything else. So.
Sure. When we talk about the Packers, Dusty talks about it a lot, and most recently he actually was in a committee hearing with Secretary Vilsack, and he questioned him about this and said, we do this over and over again. We have all these DOJ investigations, and then nothing happens. Is this helpful? Are we just on a broken wheel here? And the Secretary kind of pushed back a little, but I think we can't count on that, and so Dusty's taking incremental steps to focus on it. And one way that he's really looked at is giving more transparency in the market. His cattle contract library passed the House last month, which isn't a silver bullet, but it's a step in the right direction. It'll give one more tool to ranchers to know what beef is selling for, what cows are selling for out there, and so that's one option. Another thing he's done is the Butcher Block Act, which was implemented this past year as well. It addresses that beef supply chain bottleneck, and it gives small processors more incentives and more options. If you can't break up the 4, then at least start elevating more buyers out there. And so that's really where he's trying to focus on that market as well. So the Butcher Block Act, and then the other one he had was the Small Processor Overtime Fee Relief Act, and we saw that really at the height of the pandemic, where small processors, they were being fined for having people work overtime. And so, Dusty's always a big proponent of work and how work has dignity, and he doesn't think people should be fined when they're working overtime to make sure that there's going to be food on the grocery stores, to make sure we can go get it. So those are a couple options. There's not a silver bullet in Congress right now, but if we keep making steps in the right directions, hopefully we won't just rely on these DOJ investigations that sometimes seem like they're just going in a circle. And it reminds me of your internet. It's just loading and loading and loading. It's just kind of not going anywhere. So that's a couple things Dusty's working on.
Not to be the bearer of bad news here, but I do think that the Senate is and Senator Grassley have kind of moved on from the 50-14. He's proposed it probably the last 20 years and it hasn't gone anywhere, but thus out of that came this compromise with Senator Fisher out of Nebraska. And the compromise bill is kind of being met with mixed reviews, I guess you'd say. If you want to talk about ag unity, we don't have it on this bill. Everybody's all over the place. The U.S. Cattlemen and the National Farmers Union, they support it. The Farm Bureau supports the transparency provisions, but recently announced opposition to the cash mandates portion of that. Stock growers, I think last month, voted to support the compromise bill, but that was a 15-10 vote, not exactly unanimous. And meanwhile, RCAF and many members of the stock growers oppose the bill. NCBA opposes it, as does the South Dakota Cattlemen. So the groups are all over the board on this. Even in the, they're looking at having an ag hearing on the bill probably in the next month or so. So Senator Thune will be, at that meeting and also listening intently. He has not come out in favor or against. He wants to hear more about it. Obviously, when you have the groups all over the place, it's a little tougher for a person to jump on it early. But again, he's not saying no, not saying yes, wants to hear more about it. Even the Ag Committee themselves, Senator Stabenow, the chair, she's interested in it because she's kind of the administration's point person on this, and they like it. And then you have Senator Bozeman, who's the Republican ranking member, and he supports the bill, or does not support the bill. So even there among the leadership, we have differences too. So it's yet to be determined on where that's going to go, but that kind of seems to be the main vehicle at the moment with the most hope for getting through.
Question number 3. The Meat Institute lobbied to remove country of origin labeling, known as COOL, and succeeded in 2015. Now, any beef product from anywhere in the world may be labeled as a product of the USA. The American Beef Labeling Act of 2021, Senate Bill 2716, sponsored by Tester, Thune, Rounds, Booker, would reinstate mandatory COOL and ensure that products of the USA really mean the beef was born and raised and harvested in the USA. What is your senators' or representatives' position on the American Beef Labeling Act of 2021?
Well, that's an easy one since it was Senator Thune's bill, and to introduce, we are strongly in favor of it. And we have, at this point, there's 10 sponsors of it, including Senator Rounds. I'm not going to rehash the history of COOL with you. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but the senator was on board early and often. He's voted for COOL, mandatory COOL, several times. Getting in, the WTO problems with it and why it was pulled out the last time. So for the past year, I know at least, our staff has been looking at trying to thread that needle of making, finding it if there is a solution to have the MCOOL instituted while still passing WTO muster. Like it or not, we got to do that. And we think we've done it with this American Beef Labeling Act. What it does is it tells the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and you working with the USDA to come up with a WTO-friendly version of MCool. They have 1 year to do that. If they can't find such an animal or they find out it doesn't exist, then MCool will be automatically instituted after a year. MCool just for beef. Like I mentioned, we have 10 co-sponsors on it, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. That's kind of, we've been adding a couple every few weeks here. And, you know, in the way the Senate is divided right now, you pretty much have to, if you're going to accomplish something, that's the way you got to do it. Getting both sides. So even when we announced 2 new sponsors, it's always 1 Democrat, 1 Republican. So we may even have another one, say another Republican waiting. We wait till we get another Democrat to announce. As for the product of the USA bill, that's Senator Rounds's. I won't steal his thunder, but Senator Thune is fully supportive of that. The product of the USA is a voluntary label that goes on that can be very misleading. It just has to have been processed in the United States to get that sticker. I think consumers are confused enough when they see a USDA stamp on it. They think, oh, that's USA. Well, it's not. And same with the product of the USA. It doesn't necessarily mean it is. So this bill would clarify that to say that it has to be born, raised, and slaughtered in the U.S. if you're going to put that sticker on there. Again, that's voluntary, but you would think that would be something that somebody like the Walmarts and Costco's of the world might want to do to even sell more meat, is to label it as U.S. beef. I think people would flock to that a lot more than if it says Brazil beef on there.
So Mark covered most of that. I'll just touch the piece where Senator Rounds has been on the other side of this issue, and he's the first to admit it, that he's come 180 degrees on country of origin labeling. He's always believed that the labeling, the USDA label, product of the USA, shouldn't be misleading to the consumer. So he's been consistent on that piece. From the country of origin labeling side of beef, everything we have is labeled, everything. I always use this story. I have a pair of slacks that aren't blue jeans. I actually do have some of them, but it's the materials made in the United States and it's assembled in Mexico. But I, as a consumer, got to choose when I bought that. And right now, if you went anywhere in this town or anywhere in this state, it would be very, very difficult to ensure that you bought a USA beef, hamburger, steak, roast, whatever it is that you prefer. And this is what this legislation will do. And it also does it because there's been some of the organizations that have opposed country of origin labeling working, obviously it's John's legislation and Mike is fully in support of it. It's because it addresses the WTO issue. And that's our trade agreement basically says we can't label our beef. I don't know why we put that in there. That makes no sense to me. It's our country. We should be able to label our products the way we want to label them. So.
Thank you. So I would agree. I mean, this is a well-litigated topic, and Dusty certainly believes that folks deserve to know where their food comes from, and he also believes that if we're going to label something product of the USA, that it needs to mean something. This was also a conversation with Secretary Vilsack a couple weeks ago. He said, consumers are confused, and it doesn't mean anything. If we're going to have this, let's have it be able to stand up. And so, these are things that I think we would all love to get done. It's hard in the House right now. And so that's where Dusty sort of tempers expectations, is just that this is hard to get through the House right now. And if we could, we absolutely would. And so, the Senate is doing a really great job really talking about this and gaining some momentum, and hopefully we're able to roll that over to the House soon. So.
I may have my notes wrong here. It says Senator Johnson is a co-sponsor of 5206. I don't think he's quite to that point yet. Let's go with that. Congressman Johnson is a co-sponsor of H.R. 5206, which would require an annual report to Congress on the tax gap estimate. This also codifies President Biden's promise not to raise taxes on individuals making less than $400,000. Remarks from each speaker, please.
Perfect. Well, you said it. I mean, this bill is one of Dusty's, and he's actually on it with Congressman Kevin Brady, who has a local connection as well. He lived down in Hermosa for a long time, and so he's happy to be co-sponsoring it with him. This bill would require an annual report to Congress about the tax gap, and it would not raise taxes on individuals making $400,000 or more, or less. Sorry. But I did want to bring up a second bill that I think it's not directly related, but it's related to everyone. He also introduced the Prohibiting IRS Financial Surveillance Act. A few months ago, the Biden administration talked about a proposal for account surveillance for any taxes, any account that was $600 or more. So if you go to the bank and you put $600 or more, the bank would then be obligated to report that to the IRS. And Dusty thinks that this is absolutely, big government at its worst. And so Dusty introduced a bill prohibiting that and hopefully claw that back a little bit to make sure that, someone who's even those different apps, the PayPal apps and things like that, if you're a long-term babysitter or nanny or something, I mean, there's a lot of loopholes here that we don't need to worry about if a 15-year-old's going to help babysit for a little bit. So both of these bills, Dusty really hopes we can gain some momentum in the House for.
So yeah, this is one of them hot topics. I mean, obviously, big government. The conspiracy theorist in me always worries about the federal government having too much control over things that really they shouldn't even be concerned about. And obviously, Senator Rounds, I don't know of a Republican that backs this, and there's quite a few Democrats actually that are not for the IRS being able to do this with our cash in, cash out into our bank accounts. So, and Senator Rounds did introduce legislation prohibiting that. And I think at the end of the day, back in June, there was 35 million tax returns that hadn't been processed by the IRS. And I know my two colleagues here would agree. We work casework all the time where someone is accused of not filing their tax return and is probably in one of them 35 million they haven't looked at. But so the IRS has got a bigger job of just doing what they're supposed to do in the first place without giving them something else that really infringes on our First Amendment rights. So.
Well, this is another issue that we're all on the same page about. With Dusty's bill in the House, Senator Thune has the Senate version called the Tax Gap Reform and IRS Enforcement Act. And it just basically codifies prevents the IRS from increasing the audits of taxpayers making under $400,000, which I know is at least the three of us up here and most of you. And it prohibits the new bank reporting requirements that they were looking at. You probably all heard earlier about the administration wanting the IRS to look into people making worth more, cash withdrawals more than $600. Senator Thune also had legislation opposing that. That one, if not dead, at least just is in a coma for the time being. Seems like that got enough negative reaction that they may not go there. The problem with all of this is that it's not that the administration is necessarily so concerned about tax cheats or that you might be getting away with a little something. They just want your money. They need some spending money, and they're just looking for ways to find it, and that's one of their methods. So we continue to be vigilant in watching those efforts and fighting them.
Our last question requests a closing remark from each of you. Our independent livestock producers and ranchers struggle to know what is going on in Washington, D.C. What are your legislative priorities and goals? How can we protect ourselves, our livestock, our profits, and our livelihoods from the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C.? You can get all that in 4 minutes, right?
Well, first off, thanks again for the opportunity to be here today. You know, it seems like it's been a pretty big theme here, this tax and spending, and that continues to be the priority for the senator. Just keep an eye on, you know, we do have to play defense here for the time being, and trying to stop some of this crazy stuff that they're trying to put through, and you know, that's priority number one. Another thing that hasn't been brought up yet today, but is you know, I hear from a lot of different ranchers and farmers, and that's the waters of the U.S., the Zoetis ruling that is pending out there. You know, that has a long history as well, going back to the Obama administration, and then some of their very vague rules on what is considered a navigable water, and if it's ditches or what the EPA is going to be looking at on your ranch. So then President Trump had an executive order that undid President Obama, and now President Biden has done likewise to President Trump. So the administration is moving forward with rulemaking on that, and it's currently in the comment period, so if you want to look that up on the EPA website and give your 2 cents, go ahead and do that. Senator Thune is leading a letter this week. He's circulating with the senators to the EPA and the Corps of Engineers, commenting against this, coming out very strongly against the WOTUS proposals. And the second ask in that is that they at least hit the pause button while the Supreme Court weighs in. There's some Idaho ranchers that have taken this ruling to the Supreme Court. I think they're expected to hear it in the next week or two, and then hopefully have a ruling in June or July. So the ask there is to, hey, just hold your horses until the Supreme Court weighs in, otherwise you're just wasting everybody's time. So we'll see how that goes. So those are just a couple of things, priorities right now. As for, you know, the focus of this event and Ag Unity, I've been preaching that going back to my Tri-State Neighbor days. I remember at that time wrote a column about, I think there were 3 sheep producer groups in the state at that time, and they could not agree on anything. And now I think there's 1 sheep group and a lot less sheep growers. So I think that's kind of a lesson to learn. We have to consider the opinions of others. We have to get more on board. You know, I think we have all these groups that often disagree, and that's fair and fine. I mean, we have Republicans and Democrats that disagree. We have Baptists and Catholics that disagree. That happens. But I think one thing that is helpful is if when you sit down across the table trying to find common ground, is that you doesn't mean because the person disagrees with you that he's evil or he's paid off or he's corrupt. He just disagrees with you. And if you sit down with that negativity and just that, you know, you're a rotten person because you disagree with me, it's pretty hard to get anywhere from there. So I think you know, Senator Thune has pushed with the stock growers, and they followed through with some meetings among the groups in Pierre. There were the big ag groups met down south as well. And we know you're not going to agree on everything, but if you can start with agreeing on a couple of the simple things, it makes it a lot easier for the delegation here to take those proposals and sell them to the other senators and the other representatives to say, hey, we got unanimity on this thing, we need to get it through. And that just makes it a lot easier for us to get on a bill. And the heckling just throws me off here. So, but yeah, so anyway, anything we can do to bring unity among the groups. You know, you don't have to necessarily hold hands and hug, but if we can just find some things we all agree on, we can take those to DC, we can get those things passed, and just makes life a lot easier for us and for you. So appreciate the event, and have a great rest of the stock show.
Okay, so, you know, Mark touched on the differences in the groups, and I just wanted to, you know, I go to a lot of brandings in the spring, and it's interesting because when I'm at a branding, I can go to a branding just a few miles down the road, and really I could jog there, but I'm not going to do that. I'm probably going to drive there, but maybe ride my horse. But the bottom line is that, you know, our hearts are all in the right place, and we need to talk, and we need to remember that our kids go to the same schools, we go to the same churches, we live in the same communities, and we don't necessarily agree how to address it, but we know we're being attacked. And 35 years in the military has taught me that if we're not together when we get attacked, we're in trouble. So I'd like to see us really do that. And then another piece is your conduit are the people that are on this stage and the people that we work with in these state offices. Senator Rounds just hired a new ag person for DC. He's from Texas, and it gives us some diversity. We already have plenty of ag people who are from South Dakota, but we need to take what you guys want us to do and what you want your representatives to do and execute it in DC, and that's through the legislative process, and that's a challenging process. So we got Michael Brooks, and he's actually, his first day is today. I just talked to him this morning. We're gonna fly him out here, so you'll see me walking around with him here later in the week. If you see me, come on up, I'll introduce you to him. And then the last piece, I just want to talk about how you get your information to your representative or senator. A lot of people don't know this, but we're from South Dakota. We work in these offices. We live right alongside most of you, and we want to take your message to, in my case, Senator Rounds, and I do. If you invite us out, or if you invite, usually, obviously you want Senator Rounds before you want Jim or Rob. However, he's not always available, but we're always available for your association meetings, banquets, just to be available. I've met in coffee shops with a handful of people up by Newell or wherever you end up asking me to come, so that you can get your message to me so that I can get it to Senator Rounds. So that's one thing you just need to be aware of. And please spread the word. We're available. We have an open door, and we're always answering our phones. You might have to leave a message, but we will call you back. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, I would echo that. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I think they both touched on this, but what we all agree on, and what Dusty certainly agrees on, is that a prosperous farm economy is what's going to be best for the entire state, not just because we're ranchers and farmers, but also because of the main street and the car dealers, and it trickles down, and that's what the basis of our economy is. And so it's something that I think does unify us more than it should divide us. And something I would add is that while introducing bills, it makes us happy, but Dusty's really taken a pretty tactical approach on this. And that's why he's received the award of the most effective Republican on ag policy. It's hard to hit a home run in Congress, especially when you're in the minority, but you can hit singles and doubles, and you can incrementally get there. And I think that's what Dusty has been able to do. When just last month we passed the cattle contract library, which was the first major cattle marketing bill to not only pass committee, but on the floor in this chamber in the last 7 years. And on that exact same day, we got ocean shipping reform passed, which was also the first overhaul of maritime laws in over a decade. And so those aren't uncool, but those are incremental changes that we're taking one bite at a time to get there, which is why Dusty got that award. Another one he got was actually he was named the most transparent and accountable Republican member of Congress. And I think that goes to show how we have these open door policies, the senators as well, of, hey, we're here, we're always willing to talk with you, we're always willing to meet with you, and we want to tell you what we're doing, and we want you to tell us what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right then. It's not always going to be a home run, but we're going to keep working at those singles and doubles, and just please keep reaching out. I'm in the Rapid City office. John Weber is our legislative director in DC, and he is probably well known by many of you as well, and he's always willing to take a phone call and keep working on these issues. So thank you for holding this meeting for us today, and we will continue to be around. I'll continue to be around today and the rest of the week as well, so thank you.
Thank you all for your time and participation. As they all mentioned, they are available afterwards for private conversations if you have more questions. Right now, we're going to take about a 5-minute break and get back here with our next panel. 2 minutes, everyone. We have 2 minutes and we'll return to our program. All right, we're ready to get started. If I can ask you to find your seats, please. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to move on now to the portion of the program with our panel members being the NCBA, RCAF, and the U.S. Cattlemen's Association. The spoken goal of this program is the need for unity in the cattle industry, and I do believe that remains our goal from today. If I can ask with a show of hands, how many of you listen to the radio? Looks like everybody does. How many of you listen to 5 channels at one time? 2? You listen to 1. Why do you listen to 1? Because you can hear what it's saying, right? If you tune into 2 or 3 at a time, it gets to be a lot of noise and a lot of words. We need unity. We need one message. And that's the goal of what we're doing here today, is to try to come at this from one perspective so that we're all supporting one another for the betterment of the cattle industry. And I very much appreciate these folks being able to spend their time with us and help move us that direction. We would ask for an introduction of yourselves and whom you're with, and we'll start with you, Justin.
Thank you, Clay, and thank you guys all for being here. I think this is a great conversation to have. I'm Justin Tupper, Vice President of U.S. Cattlemen's Association. I also run St. Ange Livestock in St. Ange, South Dakota. I think the conversation about unity in the cattle industry is one that we have to have. When you look at the ag industry itself only being about 2% of the population, then when you segment that down to cattle business, and then you segment it into 3 different groups giving 3 different topics or tearing each other apart, our voice gets pretty small. So I think the need for unity is huge. I was fortunate enough to go to Phoenix when all these groups met in Phoenix along with Farm Bureau and Farmers Union, and one of the things I thought was huge there was we talked about the need for being cattlemen first and cattle groups second. And I hope that continues here today. So it's my pleasure to be here. Justin Tupper, Vice President of the U.S. Cattlemen's Association.
And good morning. Thanks for being here. I'm glad to see so many faces, both friends, neighbors, and people that even I disagree with on occasion. My name's Larry Stomprud. My son and I run a modest cow-calf operation near Mud Butte. We've been on that place for 113 years now. So the cow business is nothing new to us. I'm a former president of the South Dakota Cattlemen's Association and a member of the NCBA. NCBA advocates for its members on a wide range of issues that impact our industry. And our members come from all 50 states, all sectors of the industry, but the majority of them are cow-calf operators like myself. Every member in the organization has a voice in the direction of our association. The issues we lobby on are decided at our annual convention, which is meeting as we speak in Houston. And the key point here is that NCBA does not stray from the direction that our members tell us to go on the issues that are important to them. The advocacy that happens in Washington is separate from our advocacy through the checkoff. Make no mistake, the dollars that are spent in the checkoff are separate from, and there's a firewall so that no checkoff dollars are spent on policy on issues that we advocate. Oh, that's short. The members make it possible for us to support our grassroots members and the strength of our relationship with the policymakers, including the congressional delegation that was represented here today. And we have a real good relationship with them. Throughout our history, our goals have remained the same: to improve the business climate of our producers, protect our family ranches and farms, and preserve our way of life.
My name is Karina Jones, and my husband and I ranch down in central Nebraska by Broken Bow on the edge of the Sandhills. Growing up, I knew what I wanted to do, and that was raise kids and cattle, because that's all I ever saw anybody else in my family do. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to go out and live that life. But at some point, the view just isn't enough. At some point, you have to get profitable. And that's when I really started to leaning into what was going on in the cattle industry, and that's when I found RCAF and started becoming involved in policy as a member and being vocal and speaking out on behalf of cattle producers. And I guess after a while, as Brett Kinsey says, they drafted me onto staff to go around and to talk at these things, and now I'm the field director for RCAF. RCAF is the largest cattle producer-only organization in the nation. We only represent the cattle producer side of the beef supply chain. We stay aggressively engaged in all 3 branches of government, probably most notably in the judicial branch of government. Our goal is to make us as cattle producers profitable. Those are the reforms we fight for, and we are guided by our membership every year. And if you look in your Vitalix bag, you have a cattle industry long-range plan, and this is what guides us. And so you can feel free to take that out, flip through it, and I'll talk about some more things in there here shortly.
Okay, once again, we have questions for our panel that were prepared largely on concerns that were presented to their organizations, and they in turn handed them over to a panel of folks here that selected those questions. So if you have questions or discussions you'd like to have later on, please do so. There will be no questions from the floor, but all three of these folks will be able for private discussions later on. On November 17th of 2021, all three organizations represented supported the suspension of imported beef from Brazil due to reports of BSC or mad cow disease. There were concerns given Brazil's historical lack of cooperation and questionable trading practices in the global marketplace. Please update us on this issue and give us your organization's current stance.
It was exciting to see all three organizations put in letters to Washington requesting the suspension of Brazilian beef imports. we requested the suspension of both fresh and frozen beef imports. From this wave of attention that the Brazilian beef issue got, Senator Tester introduced some legislation, Senate Bill 3230, which would suspend the imports of Brazilian beef. As well, Congresswoman Rosa DeLaura wrote a letter urging Vilsack to exercise his authority to immediately suspend the imports of Brazilian beef. And all three organizations wrote a letter also requesting that Vilsack execute his authority. And what did we get? A USDA that denied it. Said, we never saw any suspension of Brazilian beef. And so as we take this as a lesson of the power that USDA has that they continue to not use on behalf of the American cattle industry, it becomes very concerning of who the USDA works for in Washington. Do they work for the ag producers out here in the States, out here at the grassroots level, or are they taking orders from somewhere else in the beef supply chain?
This issue is one that fortunately we can see some unity in. We're responding to Brazil's systemic approach to not playing by the rules. Every time they've been given a chance, they screw it up. And NCBA has a demonstrated history of calling them out on these things. We were the first organization to raise concerns over their failure in 2021. We made a public statement in September and followed that up with a formal letter in November. And after reviewing the case from the World Organization of Animal Health. We led an extensive fight in 2016 during with Brazil's history of foot and mouth disease and food safety concerns. We worked with and closely monitored their imports and worked with USDA to suspend their imports when they had some real problems with spoiled meat that was imported into the state. And we protested their re-entry in 2020. Brazil has some real serious credibility issues and should not be allowed to import meat to U.S. Until they get those corrected. And we support Senator Tester's bill, although it appears that bill doesn't have a great deal of chance of passing, but Senator Vilsack holds the cards on this one.
Yeah, thank you. It is nice to start a topic on one we all agree on. That's fun, isn't it? So first and foremost, just like has been said, Brazil is a bad actor. They've been caught bribing meat inspectors to get tainted meat. There's no question that we have to stay on top of that. And we were also very disappointed with U.S. Cattlemen that USDA did not suspend the imports of beef from Brazil. So as that has not happened, we've got to continue to stay on our congresspeople and push them forward to make sure we can keep a safe and product within the United States. U.S. Cattlemen is working with Senator Schatz from Hawaii on a bill that's called the Forest Act. The Forest Act would prevent any product from being imported into the United States that results in deforestation of the Brazilian rainforest. So there are other avenues that we're going to try to take when we can't get USDA to do the things we have to do. We're going to work in ways to make sure we can get this to happen. So if we can't get USDA to stop them, we're going to find other ways to do it. And if that's one of the avenues we can do, we'll have to. But they're definitely a proven bad actor, and we cannot let them taint our good reputation as one of the safest proteins in the world is beef. So we've got to stay on top of that, and USDA is all about it.
Wow, an auctioneer can fit a lot of words into a short time frame, Justin. Question 2. Senate Bill 949 establishes that a minimum of 50% of a covered packer's weekly volume of livestock slaughter must be purchased through spot market sales from non-affiliated producers. What is your organization's commitment to fighting for increased competition and market transparency in the fat cattle market?
If you've been following this, you realize that this is a very complex issue. Cow-calf operators, stockers, and feeders all deserve good price discovery to ensure fair prices. And in recent years, the percentage of negotiated sales has made it more difficult to get good price discoveries, particularly in the southern plains. You may have heard that our voluntary efforts to increase this price discovery and the trip triggers, it's a complicated system, but it seems to be having some effect to the positive. We actually saw more negotiated trade after we implemented this. And as an industry, we've made good progress, but we have still a lot of room for improvement. Right now, as I said, the NCBA is having their annual meeting in Houston, and this issue is probably highest on the list of any of the issues. And they'll be addressing ways to make improvements in the program. And I and you should look forward to what comes out of the meeting this week. But price discovery isn't the only thing that is affecting our bottom line. We've supported efforts to improve market transparency by successfully advocating Representative Johnson's cattle contract bill and hope for its passage in the Senate. New USDA reports that provide more insight to the formula transactions and the reauthorization of the livestock marketing, mandatory marketing. We've worked with the administration to secure $1 billion to expand packing capacity, and that seems to be the biggest bottleneck right now for not seeing a better price for our fat cattle. We also have been involved in labor reforms to help us keep those packing plants operating. Labor is a problem for everybody, including the packers. Finally, NCBA was the first to call for the DOG investigation, and we continue to look forward to seeing some results of that. We're vocal in our robust oversight of the beef processing sector. We can't repeal the law of supply and demand, and the market.
Thank you. 5014 is a bill that U.S. Cattlemen supported from the beginning. We would love to see 5014. The co-sponsor of the bill, Senator Grassley, looked around the Senate and found out this is not a bill that can pass. As much as we would like to pass some of these bills, and we believe they're correct, they've got to pass through Congress. We heard those people talk in front of us. And if you can't get them passed, then we're spinning our wheels a lot of times trying to get something done. So out of that, Senator Fisher's compromise bill, co-sponsored by Senator Grassley, came up, which I think has a lot of good things in it. It establishes a minimum, and I want to emphasize a minimum negotiated cash standard in the regions. Right now, about 50% of the cattle sold in Iowa and Minnesota are sold cash, and they're bearing the brunt of establishing a cash price for the rest of the industry. We're not against AMAs. We believe they have to be a part of the equation. One thing that the opponents, some of them up here, have talked about is that the bill is not enough, or it establishes regionalization. Well, we are already regionalized. The markets are regionalized. There's differences in what percentage of cash is sold. There's a Texas A&M study that came out today, that says Texas will be zero negotiated cash by 2026. We don't have time to wait, ladies and gentlemen. The Fisher compromise bill is a good start, and it sets a floor of where we need to go. It's not going to get everything we need. There's no such thing in Congress as a silver bullet bill to fix all the problems we have in the cattle industry. It's been broken over a lot of years. It's going to take a lot of time to fix. But if we don't take the reins and get something when we've had all the limelight shed on us in this time, then we've lost. And I think the time is now. I don't think the Fisher-Grassley compromise is perfect. It does not have everything we need, but it has 17 co-sponsors on both sides of the aisle. It has over half of the Senate Ag Committee. We can get this passed. That's historic. We haven't been able to move Congress in that way in forever. And in this day and age, I think we've got to get it done. So for those reasons, the U.S. Cattlemen Association has definitely been behind the compromise bill, and we continue, and we know we're going to have to continue to work. And once we get that passed, that's not the ending point. That's just a start where we got to continue to keep working. So we hope everybody can get behind, and we can get these groups behind the Fisher-Grassley compromise. Karina?
There's an old Aaron Tippin song that says you've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. And so RCAF is committed, as the question asks, what is your group committed to standing for on this issue? RCAF is committed to standing for a minimum standard of conduct that all 24 of the big four plants have to live by, have to do business by. And so as Justin talks about the compromise bill, it would be historic because it would actually exclude 9 of the 24 big four plants. It would exclude 5 of JBS's plants. Hiram, Utah, they wouldn't have a minimum put on them. The Tyson plant out in Pasco, Washington, that has been entangled in the Easter Day drama, they wouldn't have a minimum put on them. So you're right, it would be historic. It would historically damage what we are working for in RCAF to create a minimum standard of conduct from coast to coast, from border to border, among all 24 plants. The problem with 5014 was its beauty and its simplicity. And what Washington couldn't stand, what lobbyists couldn't stand, was common cattle producers like you and I writing legislation that was easy to understand. 50% slaughtered in 14 days. And so it quickly gained ground, had 10 co-sponsors in the Senate. And so what does Washington do when something is getting hot and close? They got to create a diversion. And that's what the compromise bill did, is it creates a diversion. Why would we empower the USDA to further study these regions and to empower USDA to create regional minimums? USDA doesn't have the power to set laws. You and I elect our lawmakers. It is Congress that is to set laws, not USDA. We just talked about how USDA punted on the Brazilian beef issue, and now we want to hand them our cattle market? That's crazy. 5014 draws a line. Our lawmakers create laws for agencies to enforce. And so right now is to show courage in this country and say we're not going to stand for lobbyists and international corporate packing conglomerates to govern our cattle industry and our markets. And so also, RCAF is also known in the arena of antitrust for our historic lawsuit, our antitrust lawsuit against the Big Four packers. We're very excited that that lawsuit is currently in discovery, and I think we're all about to learn a lot more about the conduct of these packers doing business in the future.
Still there? The Beef Checkoff Program was established as part of the 1985 Farm Bill. Under the program, producers pay $1 per head assessment on the animals they market. What is your organization's position on the beef checkoff reform? Justin, we'll start with you.
First and foremost, I have to say that I've served on the South Dakota Beef Industry Council for over 15 years. And your dollar, 50 cents of that goes to the South Dakota Beef Industry Council. And when I first got on that 15 or so years ago, I believed that it needed some fixing then. I can tell you the 50 cents spent in South Dakota, because I get to help spend that money, along with 8 other organizations, is well used. The 50 cents that goes to national may need some reform. USCA's stance, we support periodic reforms. USC understands that we need to modernize the beef checkoff. We believe there's definitely things that need to be done. They've done some good things. When the mad cow in Canada came along, we're prepared to defend that. There are things that we need in that. Does the checkoff have problems? Without question. Do we think we need to take it all away? That's not necessarily what we believe. We think we can modernize the act. We can make it a little more streamlined, a little more user-friendly. We can separate the federation. I think that's something that we believe would be very helpful. We also believe that one of the changes that could help is allow the CBB to contract directly with vendors. Right now, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association is a contractor. We've been there 2 different times and worked on different research projects to try to understand better of how that checkoff dollar is spent and worked. And it's tough. It needs some redoing. It is not the be-all, end-all program, I'll guarantee you, or the biggest problem we have with our cattle industry. But it does need some reforms, and USCA supports periodic reforms of the beef checkoff.
Thank you. RCAF is the only organization sitting before you that does not accept any beef checkoff money. We never have, and I don't foresee that we ever will, because that is policy guided by our members. And so how many of you, just a show of hands, how many of you actually voted in 1985? I don't even know if we're at 10% of this crowd. I didn't either. And so the Beef Promotion Act, in order of 1985, actually says that we are supposed to have periodic referendums. Once again, guided by in the hands of the USDA, who can grant or deny those referendums. And so you and I have not been granted a referendum in 37 years to recheck the accountability of this program. In fact, we don't know if we'll ever get a referendum. So let's talk about what else has happened since 1985. Since 1985, per capita consumption of beef has fallen 20 pounds per person in this country. And a lot of these facts are exactly kind of what Dr. Sides was talking about earlier this morning. 1985, cattle producers like you and I were receiving 57% of the consumer dollar. Today, it's around 37%. We've lost nearly 20% of the consumer dollar as well since the beef checkoff has been made mandatory. In 1985, there were 110 million cows in this country. Today, 93 million, 93 and a half. So where is the checkoff winning? We're losing our cow herd, we're losing producers, we're losing percentage of the consumer dollar, and we're losing per capita consumption of beef. Something's got to be done. There are a few things happening. RCAF has 2 lawsuits in the courts right now. One of them, filed in the District Court of Columbia, is actually going on to discovery.
Let's be clear, the detractors of the checkoff do not want to reform it. They want to dismantle it. Foremost among these is PETA and HSUS and those organizations that are in partnership with them. The beef checkoff is the strongest tool we have with the cattle producers have to bend their industry. From environmental justice activists to animal rights groups to fake meat companies. These organizations are spending millions and millions of dollars to put us out of business. And with regard to NCBA, let's be clear. Not a single penny of your checkoff dollars goes to policy part of the NCBA. We work as the largest contractor to the beef checkoff, agreed, but we do some great work. The checkoff funding does support important research and consumer-focused programs in Washington, D.C. And it does support some consumer programs that drive consumer demand for beef and protects our reputation. Dr. Sides talked about dietary guidelines, and NCBA through the checkoff program provided 22 different technical comments friendly to beef consumption. And I might mention that contractors are paid in arrears, so you don't get the money up front. You have to do the work, has to be audited before it can be paid.
Getting a little competition from over here, some kids being introduced to animal agriculture, so I'll ask you guys to probably lean a little closer to the microphone so the folks in the crowd can hear you a bit. Two-part question for number 4. What is your organization's policy on beef labeling, mandatory versus voluntary? And part 2, the USDA has indicated that implementing a trade-compliant MCOOL program would cost the U.S. beef industry $8 billion in the first 10 years and an additional $7.96 billion for consumers during that same time. What is your organization's position on these costs versus the benefits to the livestock producer?
RCAF has always made it clear where they stand on country of origin labeling. It needs to be mandatory. We had it for a short period of time, and you and I all know what our cash flows looked during those years of 2014 and 15, right? Well, even the USDA data reflects it, because the cattle industry is the largest single commodity industry in this country. And when we lost MCOOL, we lost $20 billion a year in cattle receipts, and that's USDA data. That was money taken out of Belle Fourche, out of Lusk, Wyoming, Crawford, Nebraska, out of our rural communities, and that is money that we deserve to have. Mandatory country of origin labeling is the only way that we can let the consumer support us with their dollar. This is going to be the fairest way to return that consumer percentage of dollar back to the American cattle producer by creating demand for American-born, raised, and harvested cattle. Now, there is another labeling issue at hand, and that's the product of USA label. Just as the legislative panel talked about, the product of USA label is a voluntary label. It will always remain voluntary under the USDA's purview, so we can see how that's going. Everybody is volunteering not to use the label. That is why we remain steadfast to the American Beef Labeling Act, Senate Bill 1-6. As they talked in the legislative panel, we continue to gain momentum, bringing on bipartisan pairs of senators, and I think that we will soon have that bill introduced in the House, as we're actively gaining some House members that are interested in introducing that.
This issue is probably the most contentious among the three organizations you see sitting here, but let me try and explain to you what our position is. NCBA supports voluntary origin labels only if they're source verified, if they're audited. We support product differentiation in the marketplace. The main difference is that most producers believe that we can do a better job of marketing our product than the government can. We should be empowered to differentiate our beef in the marketplace with claims like origin. Unfortunately, as Corinne said, this product of the U.S. is very misleading, and that's something we do agree on, that needs to be reformed or eliminated. But we don't need a government-run label to compete with our product. We do not support the American Beef Labeling Act because it will restore cool and resort in triggering $1 billion in retaliatory tariffs from Mexico and Canada. USDA had a 2015 study that affirmed producer concerns that MCOOL has way more downside than benefits, and I can provide some of that information to you later on. There's been statements, and Mark referred to this earlier, that it's possible to make MCOOL compliant, trade compliant, but so far no solutions have been offered to actually do that. Make no mistake, Canada and Mexico haven't backed off, and if we reinstate cool, we'll be hit with those mandatory tariffs. Our problem now, our biggest problem is packing capacity. If we implemented cool, that would slow down the chain and actually be counterproductive to what we want to do at this point in time.
Yeah, this issue is one we probably don't agree on, all of us. That's a fact. Leo McDonald, one of our founding members in the U.S. Cattlemen Association, was one of the original proponents of mandatory country of origin labeling. Now, unfortunately, the WTO tore it down, and we're going to have to find ways around that if we want to bring it back. The product of the USA label needs to truly be that, product of the USA. And today it is not. You cannot go to the grocery store and assure yourself that came from a product of the USA. And we should be able to differentiate that, and the cost of that should be on our foreign competitors that are bringing beef in here. We should not saddle our U.S. producers with that cost. We should be able to differentiate that, because they should have to label their beef that it's a product of somewhere other than the United States. I think we have to listen to the consumers. I think in this day and age, the consumer more than ever wants to know where their food comes from. I think that's a huge thing. And as beef prices continue to climb, whether we like it or not, to keep our market share, we're going to have to do the things that the consumer wants us to do. And I think making sure that we can serve them a product that they want to buy, and it can be sourced from product of the USA, and they can confidently find that, is a very, very important thing. We do have some definite challenges with the WTO ruling that came down when we lost cool. But I think there are definitely ways we can work with Congress to get that back in there. So we definitely support Senator Thune's bill. We want to take away those loopholes for the big four packers to be able to label something as product of the USA just by changing the packaging. That should never happen, and we definitely have got to get that changed. So with that, we definitely support mandatory labeling of our beef, as long as we can make sure that it fits the WTO rule for our trade partners. But when we do it, let's put the onus on those cheaper cuts of beef that are coming in from out of the country and not do it to our producers is one way we believe we can do it. So with that.
Our independent livestock producers and ranchers don't know what is going on in Washington, D.C. What are your organization's legislative priorities and goals? How can we protect ourselves, our livestock, our profits, and our livelihoods from the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C.?
First of all, I take exception to that statement that livestock producers and ranchers don't know what's going on in Washington. Our NCBA staff is engaged every day with the administration, with Congress, and they're working for you whether you're a member or not. Through emails, social media, news releases, that information is available to all, and it only takes desire and willingness to look for it. I'd like to circle back on one thing from that last that I didn't get a chance to talk to. I've wondered for a long time how big a problem this labeling is, and I found out 11% of our meat coming in that consumed in the U.S. is imported meat. 73% of that is lean trim. You do the math, that's 3% of our meat is muscle cut. So it's probably not as big a problem that has initially appeared. Now I'll get back to this question. NCBA's top concern is producer profitability and making sure that cattle operations are successful in years to come. This means fighting back against tax increases that would threaten your livelihood and keep you from passing that ranch farm on to your predecessors or your successors. Zoetis is a big problem, and we're fighting that along with our congressional delegation, and they talked some about that. We're continuing to work and expand on the tax wins that we've had in recent months. We fought back against the step-up in basis. We've continued to fight for repeal of the estate tax. Maybe someday that'll happen. And we've preserved in the tax bill that President Biden proposed, the 1031 exchange. When the House passed the Build Back Better Act in November, NCBA helped stop that bill from being paid on the backs of our producers. We're pushing back on endangered species rules that unfairly protect the predators and fails to delist endangered species, recovered species. The best way to ensure future success is to get involved. Your family, your operation, talk with your elected officials, and make your story known.
I think that's a great question, and I think that's exactly why USCA has a contract lobbyist in Washington, D.C. Our organization does that for one reason, so we can stay abreast of anything coming down the pipeline that might hurt us, and it also is why we have a contract lobbyist there so we can push legislation that helps you, the producer. I think that's huge. We have to realize in all of these scenarios, we've all heard that statement, you can wish in this hand and you know what in this hand, and what do you get? Nothing. And the key to that is you've got to be able to pass legislation. We can stomp our feet. We can be mad at Congress. The three people that are up here before, we can talk to them. They can't move mountains. We still have to be able to pass legislation. So when we work on some of these issues, it's not always what we want. And that's where I'll circle back to the Fisher-Grassley compromise bill. It can get passed. That's huge. We've got to be able to pass it. You can't just go out there and look for that golden egg and be upset about the way Congress does this or doesn't do that. You've got to find a way to get things passed. And those are key issues. And I think USCA has worked hard to find those compromises that we can live with and make meaningful legislation pass. And if we don't do that, if we sit back and just wait for that golden egg to come, that's where we're going to be. We're going to never incite any real change. And so I think that's huge to have our staff out there. It's why USCA has had a member testify at every meaningful hearing in Congress since 2015. We've had one of our members at every one of those congressional hearings, so your voice can be heard, and that's huge. We're such a minority, we've got to make sure our voice continues to be heard. So I think that's why it is important to become members and get involved as ranchers, that you've got to have your voice heard and make sure that you're putting your money behind the organizations that have your best interest, not only your best interest, but the interest that can get passed and that you can move forward so you can get something done. So hopefully that explains why USCA has a full-time lobbyist in Washington, D.C.
In that brochure that I said is in your Vitalix giveaway bags, we have our legislative page. We update this every year, RCAF does, and so the bill numbers are right there, the legislation's right there. We cannot make it clear to cattle producers where RCAF stands on legislation. We give you all the information right there. So just a quick recap of what RCAF supports in the legislative branch of government. We stay true to mandatory country of origin labeling, Senate Bill 2716, the American Beef Labeling Act. Our market is getting unfairly displaced by foreign imports. Have you looked at the USDA data on the imports of live cattle? We import 3 to 4 times more head of live cattle a month than we export. During COVID, we were importing upwards of 200,000 head a month, okay? That is a concern to you and I. That's displacing you and I's market. Senate Bill 949, the 5014 spot market bill, we stay true to. That's under the guidance of our membership. That's what they want us to do. We are not about to push the easy button in Washington and go along with what we think we might be able to get. RCAF is governed by people, not by votes. Okay, we represent cattle producers, and so they are telling us what they have to have in order to get profitable, and that's what we will fight for. A couple other bills on the checkoff that you might want to put on your radar. Mike Lee's Senate Bill 2861, the Opportunities and Fairness in Farming Act, would prohibit any lobbying organization from receiving checkoff funds. If our beef checkoff is truly supposed to be for the promotion and marketing and research of beef, let's get it into the hands of researchers and marketers and out of the hands of lobbying groups. Also, another bill introduced by Senator Mike Lee, the Voluntary Checkoff Participation Act. This would make all checkoffs in all commodities voluntary. The OFF Act also applies to all checkoffs, not just the beef checkoff. And so those are on this legislative page. You may want to take a look. OFF Act, and I think, yeah, the OFF Act is also introduced in the House. So legislative priorities are all right here in black and white.
Karina, you fool me every time and you turn that dang thing off. It's okay. We now give each of you 3 minutes to have wrap-up comments. We'll start with Karina.
You know, something else that's on this legislative plan right here at the top is that Capitol switchboard number, 202-224-3121. I dial it in my sleep. You call the people that you elect every week and you tell them, urge them what you need, what you want, okay? Be polite. Realize that those people answering the phone, they have a wide width that day. They're hearing about a lot of issues, you know, so I always encourage our cattle producers to be polite. But don't expect RCAF, NCBA, or USCA to do all the talking for you. We want you to lobby for yourself. It's honestly one of the things that drew me to RCAF before I was even a member, was them encouraging me to speak for myself and to speak up for our operation. And now that I've got 3 daughters that look me in the eye saying they want a ranch too, now I'm fighting for the next generation as well. And so when I'm at county fairs with them and junior rodeos, you better believe that is on my mind. I do not want our way of life and this crowd getting any smaller. But it's not enough to just have a pretty view anymore. We have got to be able to pay our property taxes and our bills and all the things coming at us. And very few cattle producers are just single income operators anymore. Almost all cattle operations are having to be supplemented by an off-ranch operation. Feeding America is a noble profession, and I don't think it's too much to ask to be able to make a living wage. I don't think any of us are trying to get rich doing this. We're just asking for a fair playing field so that we can continue to do what we're doing and feed the American people. Am I right? I mean, I don't know. I just don't think we're asking too much to reinstate MCOOL and create fair cattle markets.
I think it's safe to say that the 3 organizations that you see setting up before you agree on the general goals of our organization, of our industry. We philosophically disagree on some of the ways that we need to get there. And that isn't unhealthy. It would maybe feel better if we all agreed on everything, but we don't, and that's why we have Democrats and Republicans and libertarians, different philosophies. There's no doubt that our industry faces many challenges, and it's tempting to block out the bad news and focus only on running our farms and ranches. The reality is, like she said, we need to become advocates for our industry. We need to be talking not just to our neighbor down the road, other producers, but we need to be talking with the consumers. And that's why NCBA is focused on reaching new people and explaining the benefits of beef. And I'm really glad to see what Gary Sides had to say, and I wish we can all parrot the message that he brought to us this morning. That's the way that's the path that most safely guarantees our farms and ranches a future, and our future customers the good quality beef. Whether it's recent campaigns to demonstrate the sustainability of beef in places like New York, or the muscle work that resulted in the Flatiron Steak, each program area that NCBA works on behalf of the beef checkoff is adding value both directly and indirectly to the investment cattle producers are making through their checkoff dollar. And it helps keep the beef industry in the center of our plate. On the policy front, our doors remain open even when Washington, D.C. closed up in the early days of COVID-19. We kept fighting for policies that would help our producers and keep our businesses open. And I encourage you to visit our website, policy.ncba.org, and keep up to date on what we are doing on a whole range of issues. While we may have policy agreements up here, the best way to make your voice heard is becoming part of the voice. If you don't agree with me, you join RCAF or join U.S. Cattlemen, but get involved in the process. Our grassroots members drive our policy forward, and we take our direction from our members. please consider joining us and having a vote in the process.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys today. I think it is huge in our industry that we find ways to unite. And again, we're always going to have some differences, but because of we're the small fish out there, we've got to find ways to unite. And if we want to get meaningful things changed, we've got to get together to get some of that done. And it's never always going to be perfect. But I think one of the things we have to remember is that we're all cattlemen. And we said that at the beginning of this. And when we're working and we don't always agree, we need to be cordial. We need to make sure at the end of the day that we're putting forward the right foot. What Gary Sides had to say earlier today, that's the challenges facing every one of us. The narrative is against us, and we've got to make sure that we change that narrative. I think you've started, all of you, but being here, you've got to get involved. Anytime I get to talk, I say it is imperative that you get involved. And I don't care if it's at the school board level, the county level, or at any one of these cattle organizations. If you want your way of life to continue, then we're going to have to get involved, and we're going to have to work hard to do that. There's some huge things coming down the road. We lose 20% of our rural farmers and ranchers every 10 years. That's a trend we've got to stop, or we're not going to be out here and we're not going to be sustainable and viable. And I think we have some great possibilities as we work forward. U.S. Cattlemen's going to continue to bring that fight to not only Washington, but to each and every grassroots person, and we hope you'll stop by our booth. Leah Biondo's here yet today with us. We have a booth out there in the hall that you'll come by and visit with us. I would love to field questions. I'm sure lots of you have them, but time and the bankers don't let us do all that, so you'll have to come by our booth, and we'd be glad to answer any questions or talk more about these issues. So I think you all deserve a round of applause for being here today, and we appreciate you taking the time and the interest to forward the cattlemen's groups. And that's what each and every one of you are. And I hope we remember that as we go out there and we work to provide change and bring our industry forward. So thank you.
Thank you. And in your closing comments from each of you, I do think I heard a hint of unity, right? Fantastic. We do have some door prizes to give away, thanks to our sponsors. We will name the prizes, draw them, and ask that you pick them up on your way out the door. What are we starting with? Rain gauges and gloves. We'll make this quick. We're running out of time. Maggie Tupper. Ross Reichert. Frank Vollmer. Trevor Hupp. Brian Winter. Don Covey. Ryan Ulrich. And Larry Stomprud. Cups and rain gauges, we have how many of those? 2, Jaden Moreland and Ken Gaskell. A hat and a rain gauge for Jamie Henneman and John Heidler. Way too many door prizes, Doris. Some flag whips from Your Ag Network. Thank you for the sponsorship. 5 of those. Chuck Fortune. Joe Trask, Gene Fortune, Tom Costello, John Kirsteins, five caps from Your Ag Network. Winners are John Mose, Evie Fortune, Tanner Schilder, Dave Fishbach, and Teresa Brook. Two flags from Zoetis. Eric Iverson and Neil Richter. Two Dectomax Porons from Zoetis. That's what everyone's been waiting for. Val Johnson and Paula Richter. From the Tri-State Gift Basket is won by Megan Kingsbury. Megan Kingsbury. Gaines Cattle Company. We can't read very well. From D-Tie Vet Supply, we have two wild rags. Winners are Tate Eisenbraun and Brett Kenzie. A D-Tie hat is won by Jason Fink. Work gloves from D-Tie Vet Supply. Joe Brook. A coat from D-Tie Vet Supply. Casey Gerlach. And the grand prize in the drawing from Vitalix, the Cross 5 cattle cooler. Cassie goes all the way to the bottom. Keith Eichler. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. Please give Doris and crew a huge round of applause for pulling all of this together. I know they had a lot of work go into it. Thank you much for your efforts, gals.